Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Dead podcast, episode 36. This time around, we're delving into the mind of a good friend of mine, the legendary Gooseman himself, Minh, the granddaddy, aka the mastermind, aka number one public speaker. It's lovely to have you here, bro. How you doing?
Oh well, thanks for having me. I'm doing good, man, and it's a real pleasure to speak with you again. I mean, like I think we met about a year and a half ago, and
Yeah,
we
yeah.
connected so great. And I always enjoy just speaking with you, and just thanks for having me on the podcast. But yeah, so for those who don't know me, I created Counter-Strike in 1999, and ever since then, I've been involved in the game industry, just working on various projects. Spent some time at Valve, spent some time in Korea working on another PvP game that was supposed to be like a sequel to Counter-Strike. And yeah, I just kind of got my hands in so many different game projects. At the moment, I'm working on a PvE game, which is kind of like it's kind of like that game Payday, but you play as the good guys instead of the bank robbers. So yeah, I've just been working on that, and yeah, just been really keeping up to date with a lot of Counter-Strike pro scenes, like watching a lot of major tournaments, and yeah, just really enjoying a lot of that. And I kind of regret not watching a lot of the earlier pro scenes because I just recently got into it
Yeah,
ever
yeah.
since the HOTV Awards. But it's been fun to watch, yeah, for sure.
I think that was cool. It was quite a nice sort of way where it almost felt like I don't know, yeah, especially the more Counter Strike side of things. For anyone watching, by the way, this will be a bit more of a Deadlock adjacent episode. I think there's going to be a lot of game industry chat. We're going to be going through many different subjects. So keep your ears locked for this one. I think it'll be good for anyone that's been following some of the more different episodes we've been doing, like with Gabe Follower a couple days ago. And I think for you especially, man, it's the fact that it did feel like it was a nice sort of open arm reception. Where I remember, like you say, not too long ago, right, with sort of CS2 coming out, it felt like everyone really came together where you were starting to show back up at events, people were getting your take on stuff. Obviously, like you say, even that's where we got the opportunity to meet. And that was really cool for me because it was like, damn, dude, like literally in terms of sort of, my life experience and the initial game I made a career off, if you hadn't made those early decisions and sort of been sat there just messing around and came up with a concept that ballooned into such a big culture, none of that ever would have happened for me. And I remember I met you whilst I was making a balloon animal. And I was like,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah, I
right? I was
remember.
like,
Yeah,
2 seconds, mate. I'm just finishing this
yeah, yeah.
dog and then I'll say
Yeah.
hello.
That was fun. Yeah, that was really amazing. It's amazing just seeing how multi-talented you were, and yeah, I mean, just getting to like meet a lot of the like celebrities in the CS scene at that event was just amazing. It was really fulfilling for me to know that I was part of this project that led to the careers of so many people like yourself, and that's something that I always hold dear to my heart, to know that I can meet people like you and say,
Mm.
oh, that we can connect on that level. And but yeah, it was such a wonderful event, and just meeting people like yourself, and seeing more and more people kind of get into this ecosystem, this Counter-Strike ecosystem.
Yeah, it's crazy. So I suppose it's probably a hard one to quantify, but straight off the gate, from all that time ago, back then, obviously with the initial concept, sort of messing around, playing with the idea, and fleshing out, what you just thought was this could be fun. This is something I'm enjoying making. I'd love a few people to see this. How far initially did you ever really think that would go? Obviously, we're talking a completely different landscape of gaming. PC gaming was sort of
Yeah,
far smaller, right? It wasn't anywhere near as ballooned to what it is now. But the fact we're looking
yeah,
at consistently, however many million players it is, all these unique
yeah.
players, the esports side, everything Counter Strike has become. In
Mm.
your mind at the time, was there even sort of a perspective of the future, or was it just this is something I'm making that's fun? We're having a good
Yeah.
sort of energy building something. Let's see
Hmm.
what happens. Let's
Yeah.
see if people enjoy it.
Yeah, well, I mean, back then, in 2000, the game industry was so different, and I think Counter-Strike was at the time was such a different thing, and people kind of gravitated toward, because it was offering something quite novel for its
Hmm.
time. And back then it was easy for a game like Counter-Strike to attract an audience, because there wasn't a lot of other games to play, and so it was just the right time for something like Counter-Strike to really blow up. And I really feel fortunate to be able to come out at the just it was one of those things where you just you make something at the right time. Whereas if I were to make that game like now,
Mm.
I'm not. It would have been much more difficult for it to kind of like explode. So a lot of it was just timing. And the concept of Counter Strike, when I first came up with it, I never really imagined it to be an esports thing, because back then esports wasn't really popular. It wasn't until probably like 2003, when Counter Strike started to become pretty quite big, that a lot of esports organizations, like
Yeah.
there was one called CAL. They were kind of like pressuring us to make it more esports friendly. And I think at that point, that's when Valve were kind of cognizant of how much potential esports had. And so it was at that point that we started to kind of cater the game towards esports. We started doing things like adding a spectator mode. We started doing things like adding a mode that was more catered for esports, because at the time Counter Strike was more of a 10 versus 10 like casual PvP game,
Yeah.
where it was like, and so Valve realized in order for it to be esports, it needs to be more like 5 versus 5, something smaller, something more easier for esports teams to kind of form. And so it was at that point, right around 2003, where Valve really kind of formed the game to become more esports friendly. And then at that point, like, we started seeing more tournaments pop up all over North America. And I think it started in North America, like with CAL, and then after that it kind of reached European audiences, and it just kind of grew from there. And yeah, it's been amazing just to see the growth of the esports scene. But yeah, for sure, for definitely, it wasn't a game that was kind of designed as an esports game from the
Yeah.
outset. And so it's kind of nice to see it evolved into that.
Right, I think especially as well because it's like obviously where we sort of have a bit more context on how sort of some of those earlier days of kind of professional gaming and sort of salaried gamers went, but obviously it was a lot more, it was your solo games, it was arena FPS, it was stuff like Painkiller, Quake, right, that had a lot of traction. That's where it was one or two players at most signed to organizations that would get paid, where Fatality sort of stemmed from at the time, right? Those early days, kind of the late 90s.
Oh, right, like the Quake deathmatch scene
Yeah,
where,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember watching those. Like, there was guys like Thresh and
Hmm.
these really popular deathmatch players. Yeah, it was just like one guy's,
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
was it was it was I guess it was easier for like organizations to kind of like um pay them out. But yeah, I guess as like esports became like a team focused game, it was much more challenging to kind of like form like the league and to form the teams,
Yeah.
because you gotta get 5 people together, and that's much harder than getting like one person. Yeah.
Exactly.
So
This
I
was always why I remember as well, even sort of far later in the future when PUBG came around and
Yeah.
players were playing professional PUBG. I was always like, damn, from a back end side, arranging the logistics of having like sort of that many
100
people
people.
signed to your team. Yeah, coming to an event where if you have say 32 teams of 5 people, 4 people. The logistics
Yeah.
must balloon to such a sizable amount. Obviously, like CS, 5 players, 16 teams, still kind
Mm.
of awkward, but you can manage it. And then
Oh
Arena
yeah.
FPS being solo games, just 2 players. It for the budgets we had back then, especially, probably a lot more
Yeah.
reasonable. But it is interesting that kind of like you say, it went from more of you had the initial concept, but then sort of refined down sort of the amount of players even to find a more fitting balance that's sort of 5 people for communication. I suppose as well, even in the sense of being able to find people to play with that have good comms,
Yeah.
that have good synergy, right? Like 5 friends, that's kind of more
Yes.
achievable, I suppose, in a grander
Yes.
scheme.
Yes, as opposed to 10. Yeah, and I can't remember how we decided on 5. It was just I don't know who decided on 5 versus 5, but it was just,
Mm.
I think it was the tournament organizers. I think it was CAL. I think those are the guys that were kind of like, this should the game needs to be something like basketball, where it's kind of like
Mm.
5 on 5. It's easier to communicate, and I think it was their kind of like motivation that kind of spurred it on. Yeah, because yeah, it was definitely wasn't myself, because I wasn't the one that decided to make a 5 versus 5 mode. So it probably just came from CAL or
That's
one of the earlier
interesting.
leagues. Yeah,
Yeah, sort of
but
kind of getting the feelers out for what they thought at the time in terms of the tournament side and pivoting
yeah.
based on that. Okay.
Yeah, because they were hugely influential in kind of like this like giving us pointers and like
Mm.
deciding on which maps were the best. Because back then we had like tons of maps and a lot of them were kind of like unbalanced and hostage maps, and so they were the ones that decided no, the bomb diffuser maps, those are the ones that we needed to focus on, and so we spent a lot of time just polishing those ones up like
Hmm.
DE and Prodigy and those ones. Yeah. Yeah. That's
That's
interesting. I
interesting,
don't.
actually, as well
Yeah.
that you mentioned that as well, because I always did kind of wonder where the kind of shift was initially. Obviously, where forgive me if I'm wrong, did hostage come first and then DE, or was it
hmm
vice versa? It
Yeah.
was
No.
hostage first, right?
Hostage was our very first game mode,
Yeah.
and then we did bomb diffuser, and then we did the VIP escort.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, that was the order. I mean, we had one what called prison escape, but that was like whatever. It never caught on. That was a
Okay.
terrible idea. Yeah. Basically.
Damn.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know
because
if you played that one, but that
no,
was
no,
pretty.
I'd
It was pretty
never.
poor.
What was
Prison
the
Escape was
rough
basically
concept?
okay. So basically, Prison Escape was the terrorists. They were stuck in a prison, and they couldn't buy guns. They just had guns. They had these really shitty guns, and they just basically and the counter terrorists, they were kind of outside of the prison, and they had to prevent the terrorists from just escaping the prison. And so
Okay.
it was really unbalanced. For one thing, it was like completely one sided. Like because the counter terrorists, they could buy some pretty nice guns
Yeah,
later
yeah.
on, and one of the problems with the game mode was it discouraged firefights because the terrorists, they
Mm.
wanted to avoid engaging with the counter terrorists, and so eventually we realized this isn't fun. Like the firefights that did occur, they were kind of one sided. They weren't really, and so yeah, obviously that game mode quickly got scrapped. So yeah,
Okay. No,
but
that's
yeah, it
interesting
was.
though. Yeah, because I did wonder, like from obviously playing sort of back in the day, especially as well. Hostage always felt like I never sort of considered it as a side mode. Where I know, especially now, modern Counter Strike, right? Hostage is basically it's on the side. It's like a fun mode, sort of compared to
Yeah,
what Counter
yeah,
Strike has become, which is this is CS. It's that embodiment of the 5v5 defusal mode. But back
yeah.
then, I always felt like there was a lot of room where you could have had both in the sense of a rotation and more a kind of a focus on hostage. Did it just, like you said, just was more naturally over time? They thought in the community side early days that should be the focus, and you sort of catered towards that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Counter Strike originally came about because of hostage mode. Because like when I created Counter Strike, I was doing a lot of research on counterterrorism, and their main
Mm.
objective was like doing hostage rescues and that kind of thing. Bomb diffuser doesn't really happen that often in
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the real world, honestly. So when I came up with the concept of Counter Strike, it was basically like this game is about hostage rescue. And so when we came up with the idea of hostage rescue, um, initially it was really unbalanced, and we tried to come up with some ways to make it more balanced for the terrorists because, or no, for the CTs because it was really terrorist sided. And so we tried to. I remember we came up with a lot of things like, well, I mean, one thing we did was we made it so you only had to rescue like one hostage, and well, I think the current version that we have right now where like you can win the round by just rescuing one hostage,
Yeah, out
and
of the two
because
possible.
back then you
Yeah,
had to rescue all of them. You had to
yeah.
rescue I think like 70% of them, which was like a ridiculous number. But it was just one of those things where we had a really hard time balancing the maps because it was just so it was so attack and defend kind of like thing. So but yeah, it was just a bit of a challenge, and eventually just bomb diffuser just became like that de facto esports thing just because of the nature of it and just
Yeah.
how we could set up the maps that way. But yeah, I remember we did do our biggest we did try a lot of different things to make hostage rescue more esports friendly, but
Mm.
in the end it just didn't, we couldn't come up with anything. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
in retrospect, I'm trying to think of anything that we could have done that could have made it better, but I honestly I don't think that there was anything else that we didn't try. Yeah,
Well,
because we
yeah,
tried
that's
a lot.
what I mean. I think a lot, like over the years of the different iterations of Hostage, it did change an awful lot, right? Because, like, especially if people don't remember
Yeah.
too much, like the initial iteration, it was far more. I think physically they ran behind you, right? And you kind
Yep.
of rounded
Yep.
them up, and then
They
they
kind of followed.
followed you.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yes.
and
Yep.
then it was
Yep.
similar in Source, but I think we changed some things by the time it got to Source, and then early go or late into
What is it now?
CS2.
You gotta
You
pick them up and
physically
grab.
carry them.
Oh,
Yeah, and
okay, okay. Wow.
I
Okay.
think I
Yeah.
can't remember if it stops you from shooting or if you're just slower. I think you're just slower. I think that was the balance.
Oh,
Yeah,
really? Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I thought you would have a pistol or something, but interesting.
yeah.
But I guess not. But yeah, I guess it's quite a handicap then to carry him back. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's interesting. But if it was my decision, I would probably allow the player to have a pistol at least, or maybe like a light machine gun. But anyways, whatever. But yeah, it was a tough scenario to really balance, and I think it made sense that bomb diffuso was the scenario that kind of eventually won out. Yeah, we tried
Yeah.
to come up with other scenarios though. I mean, I remember we really tried to rack our brains. What else can a counter terrorist do? And, it was difficult though. It was really hard. There was not much else we could think of. Yeah, yeah. I think. Oh, I remember one time we tried to come up with like a drug retrieval kind of thing, like where the counter
Okay.
terrorists they had to like kind of like stop the terrorists from shipping some drugs or something. It was an idea that I had in my mind, but
Yeah.
I don't think we really created any maps for it because I couldn't really come up with a really an interesting concept for how the maps could be laid out.
An
But no,
idea to make it actually work
we tried our best.
tangibly. Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
it's interesting. I suppose as
yeah.
well then, like in terms of that sort of early period back then, where you were sort of even playing around with the idea and messing around with the tools, like you said, sort of at the time you were saying things were a little bit easier. Do you also mean that from the sense where I suppose these days, right, you've got a lot of different engines that people can play around with that are kind of publicly accessible, but it feels like sort of the bar for something to be considered high quality or a success, or
Mhm.
even in reality, in some cases, it can be a multi-million-dollar release, and people might still go, "Well, this is terrible. It's not good."
Yeah,
Back then,
yeah,
right, it was a little
yeah.
bit more. If you had access to early source engine, or gold source at the time, and you were kind of messing around, or the old Quake engine, if you made a mod, there was a native community that would give it a go,
Yeah.
and you'd build that fan base. Is it from that
Yes.
side as well? It was just tangibly easier to just get stuck in and go, try this.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Back then, it was just much easier to build a community and
Mm.
to just get people to try your game because of the lack of competition. But
Yeah.
I think nowadays, just we have so many games and people's expectations for games have gone so high that
Mm.
yeah, it's really hard to break in. I mean, you see all these failures, like when you look at these recent games like High Guard and Concord.
Mhm.
I mean, like technically on a technical level, they're really well done. I mean, and I mean, when I look at them, I say this is a good game. I think what they failed was, I guess, just in their theme and I guess in their theme and how they're like resonating with an audience. Like they aren't able to kind of capture people in that kind of art style, or maybe that the concept of the game and that kind of thing. Like for me, when I looked at Concord, I thought, yeah, if they just changed the theme a little bit, I think that game would have been a little bit more popular because I
Mhm.
thought technically when I played the game Concord and I looked at it, I said, it feels great, it looks great. Technically, artistically, it was great, but I think maybe if they changed the theme a little, the character style, the art style, just a little bit, they could have found probably a more appealing appeal to a different audience.
Yeah,
Perhaps that
yeah.
would have been better.
Okay.
But so yeah, it's just really difficult because of you have all these big players like you have Call of Duty, Battlefield, Counter Strike as well. They're so established, and so for someone to make a new PvP game in this time, it
Mhm.
would just be like incredibly difficult. And I get that feeling when I talk to a lot of other people like game developers, investors. They're like, dude, you're making a PvP game? Whoa, they just run away. They're like,
Right. Okay.
they're
Yeah.
sh- they're like, dude, you're like completely insane. You either have to be Valve or you have to be like, maybe a Chinese company like Tencent who
Mhm.
have like a huge amount of resources that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
could really like can really make the game polished and like really be able to like pivot or really like Marvel Rivals, for example.
Yeah.
Like Marvel Rivals did I in my opinion Marvel Rivals did well because One, it was made by like a really well-financed Chinese company who have really great developers, great artists, and also the Marvel IP is it's really big.
It's
Obviously
huge, yeah.
people, you already have like this fan base, so I think that was a good reason why. And so it's really challenging, and like you have all these. So I really feel like it's just so difficult to be a PvP gamer, and that's really why I kind of stopped making PvP games. I've kind of like I saw the writing on the wall probably like 5 years ago, and I was like, whoa, like even when I was making tactical intervention, this was in
Hmm.
2008, 2009. Well, I started making tactical intervention in 2007, and so back then it was much more feasible to make a PvP game. It wasn't really flooded, and so unfortunately, I spent too much time making the game. It took me. Eventually, I released in 2012, and so by then the industry started to become a bit too mature, and there was it was much more difficult to break into the PvP space. And also, the game was really kind of it was really unpolished. It was just, yeah, it was really. And another problem with that game is we didn't develop it in an open environment the way that
Hmm.
we developed Counter Strike. Like with Counter Strike, like from the very first beta after beta one, we were getting feedback from the players, and so we were able to pivot. We were able to change a lot of the game mechanics because of feedback from the players, and that was what really helped Counter Strike develop so quickly. But when you're developing a PvP game, you really have to develop it in an open environment, like and
Okay.
just getting a lot of feedback. And
That's
so I
actually
think that's
it's
what. Yeah.
I was
Sorry.
going to say
Yeah. You go
it's
ahead. Yeah.
interesting that you bring that up as well as something that
Mhm.
allowed you to sort of flesh it out more and kind of develop it in a manner where it wasn't sort of closed off and then obviously like it is with a lot of games now it
Yeah.
feels like from
Yeah.
my perspective in the games
Yeah.
industry it's more
Mhm.
some people will announce a beta but usually those betas are almost finished versions. They're
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
really changing much, slight balance tweaks, but the core
Yeah. Yeah.
concept is a test demo, right? They want people to just play it for a weekend and then
Yeah.
ship
Yeah.
it.
And
But
they've
it
already
feels
decided the
like
theme. Yeah,
yeah,
they've already
exactly,
decided
right?
a lot of the game core game mechanics. And yeah,
Yeah.
to me that's really a challenging thing to do, to kind of announce your game, when you've already made it 80% of the way. You should be doing it the way that we made Counter-Strike, where you
Hmm.
test it out, make sure that you have an audience, make sure that people resonate with the theme. But I think one of the things, the reason people don't do that, like I think the reason people like the Concord and High Court, I don't know exactly, but I sense the reason that they don't want to announce it too early is there's this fear that if they announce it too early, people might see it and they might copy it. That because when
Okay.
I talk to a lot of game developers, they'll say I don't wanna show this tune up because if someone sees this, they're gonna copy it. But to me, I think I don't think that that's a valid concern, because a lot of people, when they see a concept and in its early stages, they're not gonna try to copy you, because they don't even know if that's gonna succeed or not. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, I don't know. But I do feel like I get the sense that whenever there's a big project and it gets funded by investors and something, the investors will say, no, no, we got to keep this under wraps, keep it
Right, right.
secret until it's really fleshed out, until it's really 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 impressive, and we can show people. And so that's another reason they don't want to show people at the early stages. They don't want people to get a negative idea of this of the game, because they might see it and they say, oh, that looks really janky, and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
So that it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Like, they don't want to show the game at an early stage, but at the same time, by not showing the game, you really handicap yourself, and it's like you make it so like, oh shit, it's hard to iterate. So I think that's why games like Marvel Rivals, the way that they succeeded was they took an existing game, they took
Hmm.
Overwatch, and they say, we know Overwatch works. We're not gonna fuck with the formula too much. We're just gonna put like a new layer of aesthetic on it. And
Yeah.
so they didn't have to like experiment with any new game concept, like new game mechanics kind of thing. They took an existing formula and they just kind of iterated on it and just polished it. And so that was the safe play. But when you have games like High Guard that are kind of introducing a really really novel concept, and like I think it would have been much better if it was kind of announce or just kind of like play test it in an open environment at an earlier stage.
Got that feedback at an earlier point to see if you could pivot. It's interesting as well because it's like a lot of the things you've struck on there sort of resonate with what Valve have done again here with Deadlock especially, right?
Exactly.
Where it's like basically you've announced it to the public in a very early stage where you felt comfortable showing it off. They've gone through massive major iterations where the art styles changed drastically, the theming's changing, everything about the game in the past sort of 2 years that we've had access to it has changed drastically. And again, it feels like a lot of that has stemmed from the fact they're able to just give everyone a public forum of play the game, write feedback. Obviously, if enough people mention one thing, the devs listen, stuff starts to change, right?
Exactly.
Was that always something that you found sort of internally? I know it's a very different company now to sort of how it was back then. We've gone through many different eras of how Valve communicate and exist. But sort of back in those days, is that similar mindsets of how it sort of worked at your time?
Yeah, I would say so. And definitely, it hasn't changed. When I was there, that was the mentality. That was basically, get it out there, make sure that there's an audience, and iterate and use the community to guide your game. And that's really the way to do it. But the thing is, not many companies can do that. Okay, like the only reason Valve does it this way is because they can afford to do it this way. Because making a game like Deadlock is very expensive. I don't think it's making them much revenue at all. I don't think. I don't think they're making a lot of revenue on it right now. For them, Valve, they play the long game, and they can afford to do that because they have money to burn, right? They can do this. Whereas other companies, they can't do this. Like if I were to tell an investor, hey, listen, I want to make a game, but the first 3 or 4 years we're going to be losing a lot of money, and it's going to be difficult. No investors are going to go for that. Investors always want to see like a guaranteed rate of return on investment, right? And so I think only companies like Valve can do it that way, the way they're doing Deadlock. I can't think of another company that does it that way because it's just Valve are kind of a unicorn, and so it's hard for me to say every other company should do what Valve does.
Of course,
I don't think it's possible at all. They're in a very unique position, but But I do agree with what you said. That is the way that they do it, and it's been like that for ever since I remember. When I first joined them, they did it like that way with a lot of their projects. Like they would just kind of take their time with it. They're very methodical. I mean, you can see this. You see this with all of their projects. They just take their time. And there was at one point nobody even knew they were making games, and so they just came out with.
Right.
And so they're a very unique beast, and. But they have a very different mentality in how they approach game development, and it's a very unique, and it's very powerful though, because it gets it takes a lot of pressure off of you as a developer, whereas you're able to kind of like try new ideas, and like I imagine with Deadlock, they probably come up with these new ideas, and they're not afraid to try an idea. And they're not afraid of it failing because they'll know that the audience we'll get the feedback from the audience, and we can pivot, and because they have that ability to pivot quite quickly because the game is so malleable at this stage.
Well, you can see it tangibly as well. Where especially it's like obviously. Sort of that last sort of 5-6 years of Valve's sort of public development of sort of CS2, obviously the community backlash, if they really made any drastic changes, was so vast because people had gotten to a point where they expected this is the game. You can add things that maybe are cosmetic or slight changes, but anything too crazy, people lose their minds. Whereas when Deadlock rolled around, because it feels like it's their first new IP, their first sort of brand new baby in such a long time, it's far more of an open forum where you see them try such ridiculous things, and some of it really sticks, and they go with it and they'll push it further. It's interesting how it must sort of, I imagine from your side as well, even where you would have experienced that a little bit with Counter-Strike in the earlier days, like that sort of community pressure where it feels like you almost can't do what you want to do because someone will tell you this isn't what the game is meant to be. But obviously at the end of the day, it's your game, it's your project. But once it's out in the open, I suppose it becomes something a bit different. It's not really, you can't control what it is anymore.
Yeah, that's a very good point you bring up. And with regards to Counter-Strike, I remember like the first betas, like beta 1, beta 2, up to beta 7, I was just doing crazy shit. I was just like, let's try this, let's do this. Let's add a shield. Like at one point, I added vehicles, I added cars, I added dudes. are doing crazy shit. And so at one point, Valve just said, okay, we gotta stop doing this, man. The game, it reached a kind of a nexus where it says, well, the game is perfect. Like everybody, like a lot of people love it. We can't do any more crazy changes. I think it was at 1.6, like when the game, like CS 1.0 or 1.6, we decided like just like we're not gonna do any more drastic changes to Counter-Strike. The game has reached its perfect its ideal form kind of thing.
Hmm.
And so at that point, it was really hard to introduce anything too drastic, like
Okay.
in terms of like just I remember one time like after like I think it was around CS Source, they tried to introduce a mechanic with the gun system, the economy, where the price of the guns would scale based on
Dynamic
how
pricing. Yeah.
dynamic pricing. That was right. Yeah,
Okay.
they introduced that. I think it was around CS Source, and I thought it was kind of a good idea. I thought,
It was
yeah,
interesting, yeah.
that
It
was
was
a
just
good
very
idea because
unbalanced.
I think if they tweaked it a bit more, it could have been,
Yeah.
it could have worked. It could have worked. But anyways, I thought the concept of it was really great. It was really awesome, and I thought, yeah, that would be kind of cool because it would kind of encourage some of the lesser guns to be used a bit more, and it would make the arsenal much more viable. Like different
Mm.
guns, you would see different guns being used. But eventually, the backlash from the community was a bit too. It was a bit too high, and I think they kind of got scared and they decided to kind of abandon it, unfortunately. But it would have been interesting to see
Yeah,
if
yeah.
that how they would have iterated on that, to maybe tweak it a little bit and make it, maybe not as aggressive as it was initially introduced, but to have dynamic pricing a little bit come into play, like maybe have the AK-47, maybe have the price of it increase up to a maximum of 15%, maybe 20, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know. You might see
Tone
a
down
different
the
set
overall
of
bloat
guns.
a little bit. Yeah, because I remember
Exactly. Yeah.
literally there was games I played during that where I think if the team had like 5 orbs, everyone was buying orbs over that game. By the
Yeah.
time it got to like the next round, you'd be buying deagles for $50. It was like what was it, TMPs for $50, and it was just
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
something's going crazy here.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
weird as well because even you mentioning that as an idea, obviously that looked. I imagine looking back on it, it's like, oh, this was a failed concept. That's a shame it didn't really work. But I've still
Yeah.
had weird thoughts about that. Even where with Deadlock, there's been times where it's like when stuff becomes incredibly meta in the item shop, and it's like the flavor of the month, right? And something so overpowered. I've had those
Yeah.
thoughts before where I'm like, would it be the worst thing to dynamically alter pricing there and kind of? I know it goes against the core sort of MOBA design, but it's something where
Mhm.
it felt like an idea that, if fleshed out, could have been
Yeah.
used in a lot of different games. Like it wasn't at its core a failure of an
Yeah.
idea. It was just implemented in a
No.
wacky
No.
way.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I do believe. I agree with you too. And I think if they just spent a little bit more time tweaking the values and just making it a little bit more reasonable, because
Mm.
at its core, it's basically inflation, right? It's like if you
Yeah.
buy too much of a product, price kind of goes up. Demand kind of goes up, and you see the players, they pivot to another product. I think it would have been interesting to see how it would have played out, because one of the main frustrations I had with Counter Strike was what we did was we had all these great guns. We had like 20 or 30 guns, but
Mm.
only maybe 20% of them are being used to like used often. Like we had like 80% of the guns just kind of get ignored. Like who
Mm.
really buys a shotgun? Who really buys like this type of gun? Who really buys like the MP5 SD? These kind of things. And so like I wanted to like encourage like more uses of the guns, and so I thought the dynamic pricing was that ticket to kind of make the game a little bit more more variety, have a
Yeah.
bit more variety in the gun selection. But I guess in the end it would have made it much more difficult for esports team to kind of plan around. I think because esports, they train so much, they train.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so to add dynamic pricing into their training regimen, I think that would have been a bridge too far for them. But I don't know. Who knows? Maybe if we pushed it a bit more, we could have got people to like as I said, if we just tweaked the values so that they weren't so
Yeah, yeah.
ridiculous, like like it might have been interesting. We could have seen
Yeah.
more usage of lesser used guns.
I think that's always been something as well, where it seems like that's kind of been, even to this day, sort of a core prospect, where the one thing that Valve have even continued to push in Counter-Strike for that idea was they wanted more diversity in kind of how you played the game. They wanted more weapons being viable. They wanted more stuff being viable. They've done a lot of similar stuff now, like with Deadlock. It feels like one of the reasons it's got such a mass appeal in terms of the MOBA development side is that it's not as sort of in a box in terms of, necessarily in some MOBAs you might have a hero that's a hard support. This is a hard carry. They can only really fulfill these roles. It feels like Deadlock that's all kind of blurred. The way you could build these heroes, the way you can play them, there's
No.
multiple different ways you could approach that. So it's really opened up a far more vast player pool where you get people that come in and maybe they just like the movement, maybe they just like the aiming, maybe they like the abilities and the MOBA side. I think it's really opened up sort of this idea that it's more accessible to more people and you can play it in different ways. And I wanted to get your opinion on this as well, because I think one thing that does is, in my mind, it just encourages way more fun. And I think fun is a big word that, to a degree, in modern gaming has kind of been toned down a little bit. I'd say it feels like a lot of the stuff that people are focusing on these days when it comes to games, which I'd say weirdly partly was kind of the knock-on effect of CS getting so big, right? Everything wanted to be competitive, tactical, sort of methodical. I feel like, do you think there is more of that room now?
Predictable, kind of like.
Yeah, right? Do you think there's more of that room where we could see more of this stuff where it's sort of, is it just a hard balance? I know, from your side in terms of game development, we're striking that sort of mix of it's fun to play, you can play it in many ways, but it's got something that brings you back, I suppose, either a competitive element or how does that sort of work from your side where it's balancing what are two very different things to make them fit?
Yeah, I mean, for me, always when I was making PvP games, I've always came at it from just I was kind of I didn't really pay much attention to the esports stuff. I always thought that the esports stuff can kind of come later. So I always focused on just trying to make it fun for like casual players, people who just like to play pickup games. And I think what Counter-Strike did, like with having like a casual mode and having like a rank mode, I think that's a good solution where you have your players, because I would think that of all the people that play Counter-Strike, I think probably like 80% of them they play. I imagine they're just playing the casual mode. They're just playing it to get the skins, that kind of thing. And the 20% they're playing the rank mode. I don't know what the numbers are, but I imagine there's a lot of people who do play it just for like shits and giggles, just for fun.
Yeah.
They're not really in a team. And so I think it's important that Valve kind of it's good that they kind of taking that approach with Deadlock, where they are kind of experimenting with what you say is like having these really wacky builds, and I think it kind of makes the meta much more complex, and so people are trying to find what's the ultimate meta, what's the character build that I need to max out on, and so it just makes it a little bit more complex, where it's not as like, okay, I just picked this guy, I know this guy's the best, but it makes the meta a little bit more difficult to kind of like narrow down, and I think that's a good thing to have a more complex meta where it's not just pick these guys and you'll win in these scenarios. But yeah, I think from a developer standpoint, I always try to just try to just for me, I've always just tried to enjoy it to make the game just fun for like a random environment. Like if I'm playing the game, 90% of the time I'm just playing with someone I don't know, because I generally don't. I don't play with friends anymore because my friends, as I get older, it's hard to play with friends. So, yeah, I want to have an experience where I play games with just strangers, and if that can be a fun experience, that's ideal. So yeah, for sure, it's a difficult balance though, because but right now I think Valve, they're cognizant of the fact that right now Deadlock is in an experimental stage, and they're able to. Right now they're not. I don't think they're focusing on esports. They're just focusing on just getting a game that's fun.
Yeah, just making it a fleshed out concept and the best sort of version it can be. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's great what they're doing with that though. So I really think that it has a lot of like strong legs and stuff like that. And I'll give you one point about like one of the things, the restrictions that we had with Counter-Strike was. I remember in the early stages of Counter-Strike, we had a diverse pool of maps. We had maps like really dark maps, really bright maps that took place in very colorful scenarios. But as the game became more esports friendly, there was a mandate that, okay, you know what? We can only make maps at a certain brightness level. We can't have dark maps anymore.
Okay.
We can't have maps like that are too colorful. All of the maps have to have like kind of like a kind of like a desaturated, like kind of like a very consistent color tone. It can't be too bright or too dark. And that this was because they wanted the game to be easy for the eye to read, to kind of distinguish from the players. And so I remember when that happened, I was like, oh shit, so now we can't have like more dark, because I kind of like the darker maps where they're kind of dark. They kind of made you kind of pay attention to the
Yeah, yeah.
shadows a bit more. And so it was like I was kind of sad that we had to only create maps that were of a certain visual style and kind of thing. So that kind of limited what we could have done, because I wanted to make more moody maps that were kind of like in the rain and kind of darker. I mean, like when you look at the recent edition of DE Train, like
Hmm.
like it was kind of like I think people didn't like it because it was, well, I think people didn't like it because maybe the layout was a little bit complex, or they didn't like the changes. But I like the lighting in it. Like I like
Yeah,
the fact
yeah.
that they were trying to do something a little bit more moody, and so hopefully they'll kind of lean into that a little bit and
We,
not be afraid to experiment with more.
Yeah, it's
Um,
interesting you mentioned that as well because it's. I actually like at the time thought that was a really interesting way they approached it, right? Where obviously it's not especially sort of it's not nighttime, but it's far darker, right, in terms of
mhm,
the overall lighting. And then
yeah,
they implemented that sort of
the
weird
rain.
Valve
Yeah.
way that you've done rain, where it's technically only rains in areas that really there shouldn't be gunfights. It's sort of spawn areas, outside locations. You have sort of the toned down rain effects on weapons, but they're not the physical particles aren't present unless it's in
Mm,
sort of a non threatening area where like the heat maps
mm.
would say, oh, no one should really be fighting here, so
Oh,
you have those particles, which seems like a smart way of figuring it out. Like, okay, people will be upset about visibility issues, but if we make it
yeah.
look cool where it shouldn't affect things,
Oh.
it kind of is an interesting way. But I thought one of the weird things they had done there is for me, Train feels like actually kind of because of that contrast, stuff pops. You can see things in a nicer way. Where somehow, even
Mm,
with the darker aesthetic, we're finding ways of making characters pop in the right way. They've done
oh.
something similar in basically the latest version of what we have of Deadlock now, which came out about 3 weeks ago. Their biggest major update.
Mhm.
The whole lighting on the map has gone from more of sort of a sort of dusk sort of setting to it's a little bit darker. But
Mm.
interior sort of buildings have projected backlight coming out of the windows, and it
Oh,
feels
yeah.
like somehow the visibility has changed. Where although it's technically darker, it almost feels as if because the character models are so vibrant and high
Mm,
contrast with the dark, they really
yeah.
pop, and you've got sort of this fake lighting to allow
Ah,
you to analyze things easier. And I was sort of like, oh wow, that actually physically from the eye feels like you can identify stuff in a bit of an easier way. So it's
yeah.
interesting, I imagine, how even that limitation of maybe sort of thinking, okay, because we have to cater it to this style because we know this works, it's easy to see. Could
Yeah.
artificially limit you in some ways as well, because maybe if you don't sort of push to see how else could we use this lighting style, how else could we try and make these maps look, you might sort
Yeah.
of get stuck into not being able to take the concept further and come up with new solutions to, I suppose, what could have been a problem there.
Yeah. Yeah. And also they have to be cognizant of like the color palette for the characters themselves, you know. They can't make characters too dark, obviously, because it's too unbalanced, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So yeah, but that's a good point you put, and I'm glad that they're kind of like experimenting with more visually appealing color palettes with Deadlock. But I think Deadlock's a different game than Counter Strike though, because I think with
Mhm.
the time to kill in Deadlock is not as aggressive as Counter Strike. So maybe like like they don't have to be too cognizant of having characters stand out too much from the background as they do in Counter Strike. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Where you kind of,
Is
I suppose it
Deadlock
is the
still
difference of
six versus six?
yeah,
Is
still
it a
still
six
six
versus?
v six, and then
Yeah.
basically the one of the first big pivots they did, which was I think we're looking at about a year ago now, something like that. I can't remember exactly when it was, but we changed the lane system. So the initial idea from like the
Hmm.
public release version of Deadlock was 4 lanes. With
Mm.
the inner lanes being 1v1, or I think it was the outer lanes being 1v1, and the inner lanes being two duos.
Oh.
Now the current system is 3 lanes
Yeah.
of 2v2, and that's kind of what they've gone with and stuck with
Yeah.
as the concept. And it seems
Yeah.
like that's sort of what they think was the better shift, and people have resonated with.
Yeah, yeah, that's really important. Like just narrowing the number of lanes. Yeah, I remember we had that same problem with Counter Strike in the early maps. Like the early maps, we didn't have lanes. Like we had like really shitty maps with like 4 or 5 lanes, and we didn't know. Hey, how come these maps aren't fun? But
Yeah,
eventually we realized, wait, the teams are being spread out too much. So we eventually narrowed on, okay, 2 lanes. Like every Counter-Strike map has to have 2 lanes, no more than two. Maybe some might have three, but that's kind of, I don't think I can think of any good map with three different routes. But yeah, after a lot of iteration, we realized this is how to make a balanced Counter-Strike map. And I think one of my bigger regrets with Counter Strike is they're not really like one of the things with Counter Strike. When I look at the competitive map pool in the past 20 years, it hasn't changed too much. Like I only look at like there's only been like maybe 10 maps or something, and this is over the course of 20 years. I've always lamented at the fact that there wasn't any I wish there was more maps in Counter Strike. I wish there was more competitive maps. I'm not sure why that hasn't happened. I don't know. Maybe it's just there's not a lot of yeah, I don't know, but I do wish that there was more mapping variety. Because when I watch the tournaments, I do wish that I didn't have to watch Inferno like for the like millionth time.
No, yeah, I get you.
It would be nice to have a bit more map variety in Counter Strike. I will say that's one thing I do lament.
Well, it's interesting, right, as well, because I think literally even if we go as far back as like 2014, I think was when Overpass was created, and that was like the first new map in a very long time, right? That was like the first official, like Valve sanctioned map that was added. Then now you got Ancient in like 2018. But everything else has either been sort of community driven or stuff like that, which I suppose in some ways has always been a huge boon for Valve of how they've made games. We're sort of relying on, the fans that have their finger on the pulse. If we can take things that they've made that we think are really high quality and then adapt. But yeah, for original stuff, it's really not changed too much, which is something where I think as well, that element of sort of just trying out new ideas with mapping, it's done wonders in Deadlock, where like the way the map started as an initial concept, right, it was a lot more limited. If you imagine sort of like the verticality on roofs, these were all basically like kill zones, everything was blocked off, you couldn't really mantle up there. And then at one point in development in sort of I think it was like 2024, suddenly the skybox was raised, all of these roofs were opened up, so now you could either go through the buildings, underneath the buildings, or literally over them. So it introduced like a whole sort of new dynamic of the sort of even moving around the arena you'd kind of fight in throughout the city, right? And then they've taken that so much further now with like the movement implementations, putting in like bounce pads. It feels like it's a lot more sort of that free flow where they're playing around with a map, but it doesn't feel like you've got any restrictions in terms of you're not going to upset anyone if one patch you try an idea. Whereas obviously, like you say, if you kind of suddenly say, right, well, Dust 2 now has a bounce pad, people would be like, what on earth are you doing? Like, what's going on? Everyone would lose their mind.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. That's a cool concept. Yeah, because with Counter-Strike maps, I've always wanted to have a map that had a little bit more verticality, like vertical, like. But unfortunately, I think with esports, they prefer to have maps that are not as vertical, and then kind of it's just better for esports. But yeah, I've always wanted a bit more variety in my map. Like for example, the Aztec. I remember Aztec. Aztec.
Yeah.
That map had some pretty good verticality where you had like people in the rivers and shooting up above, and so I kind of enjoyed that map because of that verticality. And so, but yeah, I don't know. Hopefully. I do wish that there was more incentive for the community to make more maps for Counter-Strike. But, I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully we'll see some more interesting maps, in
see how far they can push it in the future. It's interesting as well, sort of on the subject of maps, obviously getting around them and the way that you sort of move in a game varies so much, especially sort of from older games to newer games. I think we went through a period where speed and mobility was key in sort of late 90s. Then things started to slow down a lot. It was a lot more sort of Counter-Strike's influence again, where things became more rigid. You take your time. You didn't really sprint. It was more sort of, at most, get out your knife, a little bit more increased velocity. Now I'd say we started to pivot a little bit more the other way, where you have a lot more games like Apex, Titanfall, Deadlock that are all focused around speedy movement, interlinking different parts of that. What was that like for you, especially as well at the time? Was it more just sort of going with what you had to play with Gold Source in terms of the movement and trying to make it fit what you thought Counter-Strike would be, and then sort of, I know with tactical intervention as well, things got a bit sort of wackier, right? Where we had like the map with a massive car chase up the like winding hill on the highway.
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
remember like all the different ideas that were tried there. But how much has that sort of, as a core mechanic for you, been in terms of making movement fit and trying different ideas in different games that you've worked on? What sort of sticks out in regards to sort of movement?
So I think with Counter Strike, we based our movement speeds based on the size of the maps.
Mm.
So a lot like we kind of settled on that like I didn't want the players to move the way the players moved in Quake, because Quake, I remember the moves like Quake and Unreal Tournament, they were moving like, I would say they were probably moving like at 50% faster than what Counter Strike was moving. And so I
Yeah.
thought this is ridiculous, they're like this didn't feel, it didn't feel grounded. I was trying to make a game based on Counter Strike, Counter Terrorist, and so
Yeah.
I did want the game to be a bit more grounded. And so I did have to cut the speeds down quite a bit, because I wanted it to feel a little bit more like Rainbow Six, but probably
Mm.
not as slow as Rainbow Six. So it was just kind of like and also just the size of the maps. I wanted them. I didn't want players running around, like I didn't want them to reach the end of the map in like 10 seconds, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it was all about pacing. I when like for example on the map DE Dust, like it was based on, like, I knew that, okay, if the players start here and the terrorists start here, in about 20 seconds they would meet up in the middle, and so that was kind of like the sweet spot. That pacing. And so we kind of based the movement speeds just based on just like the size of the maps, and just like how often we wanted the firefights to kind of occur. And so it was based on that. Yeah, I imagine if the maps were much larger, like for example like Battlefield, like in a game like Battlefield, you kind of have to have the players move a bit faster to kind of traverse these long distances. Like in PUBG as well, you have these huge areas. But like I think with Counter Strike, we were able to kind of get away with like lower speeds because
Yeah.
of just the size of the maps. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's interesting as well. Because I always thought as well, especially with that, like some of the things that sort of made sort of CS movement and other Valve titles sort of movement, and the way they worked was also a big part of this. Is it felt like from the company side they would look, and if people identified bugs, rather than these bugs just being like, okay, that's awful, we need to get rid of that. If something was perceived to be sort of fun or potentially could be tweaked into an actual mechanic, that's kind of always been the way they've gone with it as well. It's similar even in Deadlock now, where like one hero, one of the newer heroes that's been added, Celeste, innately basically has like bunny hopping built in. Like her air gravity is far lower
Oh.
than anyone else. Her air
Oh.
control is way higher. So you're able
Mhm.
to basically obviously bring back a classic Source Engine mechanic, use bunny
Mhm.
hopping, but it's even
Mhm.
more exaggerated because she's just so much more floaty. You can do crazy things. There's a lot of
Mhm.
stuff in Deadlock where it feels like sort of ideas that were bugs in older games have been
Mhm.
tweaked and used for an idea of like, that's actually a fun idea, let's make
Yeah.
it a mechanic. And even with CS2 they kind of did a similar thing where the interactions between grenades, like blowing open the new smoke grenades, right?
Uh-huh.
Early CSGO, we had this weird bug where if you threw a HE on top of a smoke, then
Mhm.
another smoke, it bugged the particles and would let you see
Oh.
through. So I always
Oh, okay.
thought that maybe they had looked at that and gone, well, rather than
Yeah.
getting rid of this, people are using it, but let's
Yeah.
just
Let's.
make it an actual mechanic,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
I always thought was really an interesting approach.
Yeah, yeah, and I do feel like, yeah, that is their mentality, where, yeah, they will turn like something that's perceived as like a defect, or like a glitch, and they will kind of like, yeah, kind of like, if a lot of players, they kind of get
Mm.
used to it, and they think, well, let's keep it, but let's try to like kind of massage it into to
Yeah,
something
yeah.
like that makes sense, then yeah. But I think with regards to bunny hopping, that was a good point, because when in Counter Strike, we removed bunny hopping around like beta 3 or something, beta 4, and it was pretty controversial, because I would
Mm.
say probably like maybe 50%, maybe 40% of our players enjoyed it. And so, but for me, I felt like this is not something that makes me feel like a counter terrorist. So we did neuter it, because I just didn't like how it made the gameplay be so kind
Yeah,
of like,
yeah.
like Super Mario Brothers kind of thing. So I think so yeah, but I think with a game like Deadlock, it does they have that freedom to kind of have that, that wacky movement abilities. And so I think it makes a lot of sense for a game like Deadlock to kind of lean into to bunny hopping. And it's a cool, I think that's a cool like mechanic for certain characters to have that.
Yeah.
It's definitely very it's advantageous for sure because it's makes it super hard to hit these bunny hoppers for sure.
Oh, exactly, and then it
Yeah.
opens up sort of more, I suppose, in a game like this where it's a lot of like skill expression in fun different ways. It just adds another element on. I can imagine, obviously, it sort of makes sense from your perspective at the time, though, why you'd be like, right, for anyone that
Hmm.
wasn't there back in the day as well, especially the early bunny hopping before we had any sort of, slow down on sort of velocity caps, how quick you
Yeah.
could be, you would
Yeah.
be across the entire map in like seconds. It was literally, I remember Dust 2 players being out of long through
Yeah.
CT,
Yeah.
it the
Yeah.
round had just started, and you were like,
Yeah.
how's this guy
Yeah.
just one American
Yeah.
guy that had just been bunny
Yeah.
hopping his whole life, and you're like, okay, I guess I've
Yeah.
just been owned. So I can imagine
Yeah.
approaching that, you were like, right, we've got to do something to the values here. Like this needs to at least have a cap of how much velocity you can actually get.
Yeah, yeah. So it was because of those yeah, yeah, for sure. And but I think it was a good decision because like the way that Counter Strike's played right now, I feel like it's very enjoyable and at the same time still has a lot of freedom of movement. I
Yeah.
see a lot of good movement in a lot of the pro players. So it's a good I think it's a good balance that we have right now.
I think so. I think it's sort of all
Yeah.
come together where at least it's even if maybe sort of the two sides of the coin being CS still has that far more slower tactical movement, but it's still very tight. Whereas
Hmm.
Deadlock has got all the benefits of that very responsive feeling, but in a
Hmm.
more expansive sandbox where it is you can sort of chain things together, and a lot of those older sort of things where it sort of keeping velocity going, which I feel like in most games, the sort of
Hmm.
concept of it in engine
Momentum,
doesn't
yeah.
apply the same. Yeah, right.
Hmm.
Whereas it's
Yeah.
like in the Source engine and its iterations throughout the years, that's always felt like something that's been so pivotal. Is it doesn't feel like unless you stub your toe and lose it all, you can
Hmm.
chain interactions together and have more of this fluid sort of feeling. And that's something that's
Hmm.
sort of been dialed up to 11 in Deadlock, especially, where it's, because you've got things like the zip lines, so you can drastically increase your velocity, then wall bounce, then slide. There's just so many different layers that you can
Hmm.
intertwine together where it feels like they've really hit a stride of sort of being able to push how far they can take movement
Hmm.
in what's kind of become, I think, an interesting sort of way that games have approached it. I think we hit a plateau where at least most modern developers, you'd sort of add maybe a double jump, maybe sort of a slide. Slides became sort of popular in like the mid sort of, 2016 to 2018. Slides started to
Yeah.
come in. But it felt like
Yeah.
it did sort of plateau there. But now it feels like people are starting to push that a little bit more, like you say, back in sort of the late 90s with Quake and Unreal.
Hmm.
Felt like we
Yeah.
hit a very high ceiling of like, right, we're going to have bounce pads, we're going to have like ridiculously quick movement.
Yeah.
That sort of come back around, which it's interesting that arena shooter influence has finally started to rear its head again, because it felt like it disappeared for a long time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel like the game industry can be quite cyclical, like people say like the things that were cool 20 years ago, they come back, and I think it's true, because it's a new generation. The people
Yeah,
that play games now, they didn't play Quake Arena and they don't have that point of reference where they say, I already played this. This is, for them it's something novel. And so I think the game industry can be like in 20 years time, things what was old kind of comes back and we have that ability to kind of introduce like older features in kind of a newer environment in a more modern
mm.
setting. But I feel like games like Apex Legends and yeah, those are like they made the movement feel very fun and so they
Yeah,
kind of like they've kind of like kind of set the standard for like kind of showing other games, hey, you can make games like this like feel really fast and feel very very fluid and and audience there's an audience there out there for it. So it's really it's great that Deadlock is able to find that audience. But I mean like when I look at a game a game like Overwatch, like I feel
hmm
like their characters have quite a diverse range in movement sets as well, right? But one of the challenges you have with having characters with too much variation in their movement speeds is you run the problem of uh, uh, making it hard for them to stay cohesive, because if you have one character that's moving super fast, he's gonna reach a point in the map where his teammates are like, hey, wait up, I can't
yeah,
get
yeah,
there,
yeah.
and by the time his teammates arrive, that character's dead because he's too fast for his own good. So you kind of have to find that balance where you you don't want to lose team cohesion, by having character movement speeds too varied, right? And so I'm pretty sure Valve are cognizant of that, and they don't want to have it too wacky, so players can do that. Yeah, yeah. So and I think that's another reason why I kept the movement speeds in Counter Strike a little bit more slower. It's because I wanted to encourage team cohesion. I really liked it when firefights happened when there was your teammates were around, where as opposed to having isolated firefights. And so that's something to be aware of when you're designing like a team focused shooter like that. Like yeah, I mean, like like a game like Dota. When I look at a game like Dota, they have characters with quite different movement speeds as well. So yeah, it's interesting how they're able. But one of the things that it's because they're able to have uh, the reason that they're able to have that is because their characters have a really high time to kill. So because
Yeah.
you have these characters that are really fast, right? But if they're getting their asses kicked, they can kind of move away and kind of like regroup quickly with their teammates a little bit better. So I think, yeah, I guess it makes sense because of the time to kill. So Valve are able to balance these really fast movement speeds with time to kill. But with a game like Counter Strike, we didn't really have that luxury, because if as soon as you see the enemy you're dead, you can't really regroup. So yeah, definitely you have to kind of like play with these little elements when you're designing movement speeds. Time to kill. You gotta take that into consideration. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
So it affects sort of far more than just even like the concept of moving around the map is one thing, but like you say, it's a lot more in sort of it applies far more to the grand scheme of the balance of the game, even in how
Yeah.
the knock-on effect from this can be. I suppose from even like an objective standpoint, or like you said, with time to kill. I suppose that's
Yeah.
probably one of the more awkward bits, especially with CS, where it kind of there wasn't really anything like it in the sense that obviously one bullet that could be it. You could be dead in zero point 0.1 milliseconds, right, from one misplay, one misstep. So if someone's almost impossible to hit because of the movement, yeah, it's interesting. From your side as well, then, like in that kind of side of things, was there ever a point where sort of, now especially Valve seems to be kind of, again, trying to push the bar in terms of, we've got subtick as a new idea to try and push tick rates and the idea further and see if that can be refined to something newer and better where, since as long as it's been, netcode has basically been, maybe if you're lucky, 128 tick, but for the most part, you've got games like Battlefield using like 16 tick servers. I think there's like 32 tick for COD, CSGO or CS2, it's kind of, sub-tick. What was your take, especially sort of back then, especially as well, in terms of sort of tick rates and netcode? Was there a big overarching effect on development that maybe the initial player base wouldn't really see of how much that affects what you can do and how much you had to change things to actually get stuff to work properly?
Honestly, when we were developing, well, when I was working on Counter Strike, that was never an issue because for us back then, a lot of the servers in Counter Strike, I would say like 90% of the servers, 99% of them, they were hosted by the community. So like we just let them set their own tick rate based on
Yeah.
their server specs. So we didn't put a hard line cap on it, and so that's why for me it never entered my mind. Like I actually, to be honest, I didn't even know about tick rate until it became a point of controversy, because I never touched it. I just kind of I just allowed the servers the server admins to set it on their own. And so yeah, back then the tournament organizers, they would always set it to the highest they can,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they were running the servers on their own end, and they wanted the maximum experience. And so yeah, I just it was never a factor for me. I never designed the game, like we never had to change the game based on that. But so I'm not aware of like what goes on behind the decision making with Valve's decision with subtick. So I
Yeah,
can't really
yeah.
comment on that too much. I don't really know what they're trying to achieve, but yeah, personally for me, it was never an issue. But that was, yeah, like I said, it was because the communities, they were the ones paying for the servers. So I can sort of understand when a game like Battlefield, they set it to 16, which is, wow, that's really low. but
Yeah,
but
yeah.
obviously Battlefield's not an esports game, so I guess they can get away with that. But yeah, because for them, they host all of the servers themselves, so they're
Yeah.
just trying to reduce the cost. But I imagine if they had like community run servers, they should probably allow people to kind of adjust the tick rate themselves based on that. Yeah, it's always been a way of just kind of like minimizing the operating costs for a lot of these bigger companies. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that makes sense as well because it's like you say again with a lot of these companies, it is kind of you've got a lot of shareholders breathing down your necks. You've got a lot of people you've
Yeah.
got to answer to. So if the
Yeah.
initial product comes out doesn't necessarily hit as many sales, then you're like, oh yeah, it's also costing us X amount to run these
Yeah.
100,000
Yeah,
server
exactly.
racks that
Yeah,
people
exactly.
aren't even
Let's set the tick rate
populating.
to 2. Let's
Yeah,
try
yeah,
to
that's what I
yeah,
mean. Like,
let's try to get away with as low as it can before the
yeah.
players start to notice, right, kind of thing.
Wait, I
But
remember as
yeah.
well. That was even kind of a big shift where I think this was like mid 2000s, maybe 2009, 2008, something like that. I remember where
Yeah.
we started to move away from even sort of dedicated servers being as common to just peer to peer. And
Mm.
I mean, what was it? It was like Modern Warfare 2 came out or something like that, and
Mm.
everyone went mental in the PC community because they announced, yeah, there's not going to be any dedicated servers. It's all peer to peer. And obviously, the response was like, "What do you mean? It's Call of Duty has always had dedicated servers and kind of hosted servers. So it was always a weird period where we did see that shift of kind of initially the idea of people being like, "Oh, you don't need it. You just peer-to-peer servers are fine." But obviously, for the hardcore people, it was like, "Wow, this is a weird shift to
Yeah.
suddenly make."
Wow. So I didn't realize that they actually did that. So they did it like so with Call of Duty they made it so like so it was peer to peer. But what was the maximum number of players? I imagine it was quite small.
I think
Maybe like
it was like it's 16, something like that. Maybe
oh
it
okay.
might have been a little bit more in sort of like
Yeah.
deathmatch and stuff, but I don't think it was that much. Like Search and Destroy is probably like 8, and then
Oh, okay,
maybe
yeah, yeah. You can
16
get away
in
with 8.
public.
Like with peer to peer, I think the max, like before it becomes unplayable, I would say it's like maybe 12 players because it's dependent on the player's like network. Like if he
Mhm.
has a shitty like internet connection, yeah, that can be a really bad experience for the other
Yeah,
12 players. But yeah, I imagine they can get away with that because like for example for the game like the game that I'm working on right now, it's peer to peer. Basically we have one player who's hosting the game, but it's only 4 players, and so
yeah, yeah.
so we're able to kind of get away with that. We don't have to do like there's not a whole lot of networking going on. But if I were to make a PvP game with 16 players, doing that like peer to peer is it's yeah, it would be a bad experience because it
Yeah.
depends on who's hosting. Like
No,
yeah,
exactly.
if you have someone like in like a really shitty computer with a shitty internet, that really makes a really terrible experience for everything. But
Yeah.
um but yeah, but at the end of the day, like with these like EA and Activision, I imagine a lot of it has to do with like lowering the operating costs, and
Hmm.
so that's why that's why I always feel like the best PvP games are the ones that are on PC, like the games like like Counter Strike and Squad, these games that allow people to kind of host their own dedicated servers, like those are the best multiplayer experiences, I would say.
Yeah. I think it's a good point because it's like it does sort of allow a lot more sort of expression as well. Where obviously, if people could host their own servers, like we saw
You
with
can have
even sort of the
mods, yeah.
yeah, exactly right. With like a lot of these things that we all sort of know and love today, especially a lot of even the Valve catalog, like none of it would have existed if people weren't allowed to just play around with mods, experiment themselves, build
Yeah,
things, and
yeah,
and then it's where it's like all of this stuff sort of stemmed from that, right? Like CS at its core to what it is now. There was a Team Fortress as well,
yeah.
Dota
And
obviously back then.
and I think it would also help with a lot of the hacking problem because back then when I played Counter Strike, I would always join a community server that was
Hmm.
hosted very close to me, and so I got to know the community like like the admin. Sometimes he would pop in, and so oftentimes a lot of cheaters would jump on sometimes, and they would instantly get banned or like they would
Yeah,
get
yeah.
reported quite quickly, and the server admin they would add their IP to a whitelist, and so we would never see those cheaters again, and so that had a really positive effect on the game experience because back when I was playing Counter Strike we didn't really have a lot of cheaters, and I think because of that it was the reason for that was because we had a lot of these community servers that were being run by admins that were
Hmm.
that were pretty pretty diligent in like keeping a ban list and keeping a whitelist, and yeah, and so that was but yeah, these days it's not as common, but I do
No,
miss
yeah.
those community servers back in the day.
It was
Yeah, it
fun.
was
It was good. I think it's a weird like kind of the bygone era of gaming to think back on because it's even like you'll remember the days of like going on like MIC, like QuakeNet, and like
Yeah,
messaging people, right, and being
yeah,
like, "Oh, hi, 5-on-5 game," stuff like this. Like that's like forgotten culture that no one would ever think of, in the current day. Like
yeah,
if you said, someone that's playing like Fortnite, like, "Oh, have you ever heard of like MIC?" They'd be like, what planet are you
yeah,
from?" You know,
yeah, yeah,
it's
exactly.
it's
I
funny.
think yeah, I think it's just because players these days they kind of expect like a much easier like people expect matchmaking. They expect like
Yeah,
they want to just click on a button and then just want to get put. They don't want the hassle of like finding server lists and like browsing for the server list. Yeah, they didn't like that at all. They don't like that at all. So but it's nice to have the option though
yeah.
for older guys like me. Yeah, that
I think so.
yeah.
It's kind of an interesting one as well because I wonder was that ever even I obviously sort of when that became kind of the industry standard and we got sort of just you click a button
Matchmaking.
to play matchmaking or you
Mm.
click a button to play ranked, that's it. Obviously with CS's development we were still in that era of like server browsers were the standard, that was just kind of
Yeah.
what we knew, and
Mhm.
if you wanted to play a team prac you'd know where you were connecting, you'd have the IP already.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah. Yeah.
different, right? But was that ever a conversation in sort of do we change how this works and offer a more sort of one tech all box? Because obviously
Mhm.
we didn't get it in Source. Source was still basically server
No.
browsers, and then Go.
Yes.
Obviously, one of the big
Yes.
reasons that blew up, right, was like matchmaking was a click a button. Okay, I've got a 5-on-5 game of CS, and that was sort of
Oh.
revolutionary for Counter Strike at the time. Was that an
Oh.
idea that was floated then, or was that just still far removed from where the sort of the
No.
conversation was?
Yeah. So I left Valve whenever those talks came about, but I imagine it kind of came about because they saw what Call of Duty was doing, and so they saw how popular it was with Call of Duty, and how easy it was for like players to kind of like find a match easier,
Hmm.
and I think it's just a way for a lot of the casual players to kind of just uh you know not worry about the hassle. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think it was just something that Valve kind of saw other games to kind of do, and they kind of saw the benefits of it, and they kind of because I do believe it came after Call of Duty introduced their matchmaking, because it was around CS:GO, right? So yeah,
Yeah,
around
this was
CS:GO, like Call of
early
Duty.
2012, I think, would have been when it
Oh,
was. Yeah,
20, yeah, yeah. So around
yeah,
2012, prior to 2012, I do believe Call of Duty had a really good matchmaking system where yeah, and so I think Valve kind of saw that and saw
mm,
how intuitive it was just for new players, and so yeah, I do believe it was something that they just kind of saw the industry kind of shift towards,
yeah.
and so now it's just become kind of like the de facto standard, like to have matchmaking.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It
So
would make sense as well, I suppose, with the timing, because I
mhm.
think obviously the initial idea for what became CS:GO was that they wanted to get like Source on console. They wanted people to play
Oh,
Counter Strike Source, right?
oh, right,
And
right.
that would
So
have
yeah,
been if you, I suppose, if you were releasing it on Xbox and stuff, they
you
wanted
had to
people to
have
just,
matchmaking.
yeah, you couldn't have a
Yeah,
server browser. Like people
yeah,
would not know
exactly.
what they're doing. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So was CS:GO actually on the console?
They did release it in the end. It
Oh,
came out
that's
on
right.
the
That right.
original Xbox and
Yeah,
PlayStation 3. I think. Yeah, I think
that's
they
right.
shipped
And
it.
yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. So it was probably because of that, and then they I think Xbox kind of enforced and like kind of encouraged them to say you have to
Yeah.
have matchmaking, for that. So that's very interesting. Yeah, I completely forgot that Counter Strike was even on the console. But
It's
um
crazy. It's like a
yeah.
forgotten time capsule as well. By the way,
Mhm.
if you look it up and find the old footage of
Mhm.
CS:GO's launch version on like
Mhm.
Xbox 360, it's that same build. It's literally the initial release build,
Yeah.
unchanged to this day.
Yeah.
Everything looks as it did. You had the maps with a fog, the old hidden path logo, all of the
Oh,
stuff still there. It's literally like the day one version of the client that was
yeah.
shipped to Steam. It's so weird. Like looking back
Yeah,
on it.
that
It's
is
really
cool.
kind of bizarre.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's
I
interesting how
suppose.
they don't put CS2 on console. I guess they
No, yeah,
realize. I think right now console players they just kind of play Call of Duty.
yeah.
It's become like the like it's become such a juggernaut, so it's hard to compete with Call of Duty.
I
Yeah.
think it was. It's an interesting one as well because even that transitionary period is it felt like what was it? We had the idea floated with I think it was that Orange Box release. Oh,
Oh, sorry.
some kind of
Oh,
fire alarm going off. 1 second.
yeah. Sounds like a fire alarm. Yeah.
Well, that was
You're right.
weird.
No,
Yeah,
no
I don't
worries.
know what's happened there. Both fire alarms in the house went off at the exact same time, but for no reason. There's nothing's on fire. I've gone
Okay.
outside. There's no
Well,
like, yeah, they both just
okay.
went crazy. So I couldn't hear. I
Oh,
was like, God, it's so loud. Like,
yeah. Damn.
um,
Oh well, as long as you're
but
okay,
it's all,
that's good.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's all
Yeah.
sorted. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
God, where
Is
were
this
we? Were we?
are you,
You were talking about. Yes, that was it. Console. The Valve
oh yeah,
trying out
console.
releasing stuff
Yes,
on
yes,
console.
right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll edit that
Call
bit
of Duty.
out. That's fine. There
Yeah.
was no fire. We're
Mhm.
both alive. Everyone's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So what I was thinking at the time was basically the fact that initially, obviously, they tried out the idea of even starting to ship stuff to console. I think it was Orange Box when we got
That's
it was
right.
Half
Yeah.
Life, maybe the
Yeah.
episodes
Yes,
with
yes.
TF2 and Portal.
Yeah.
I think original Portal. They
Mhm.
shipped that as a bundle, right? Before
Mhm.
that, there had never been any dabbling in the console market. That was like the
Mm.
big kind of first attempt.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then I think I can't remember what happened. I think it was the PS3. I think it
Mhm.
was when the PS3 hardware was so awkward for people to code for. It was something to do
Oh.
with the CPU architecture. It
Yeah,
just
I
did not
remember that.
work with the source
Yeah,
engine,
yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
it was a real pain. I think that burned Valve a little bit, where they didn't go back to console for years. I think until Portal 2 came out, they
Okay.
didn't try it again because it was so
Mm.
the PS3 was just such a bane of existence for
I
everyone.
remember that. I remember that. A lot of developers told me about the headaches that they had. Yeah. But yeah, I'm glad that they fixed that with PS4 because yeah, the console is a big market, and so it's important to kind of like be cognizant of that.
Yeah, yeah. And what I
Yeah.
do wonder as well, then, in terms of sort of how that bridges now with obviously we talked a little bit about the idea of PvE, kind of more competitive games. But obviously, like you said for yourself, you've moved away from that a little bit in your ideology, looking more at sort of player versus environment, maybe a little bit less focus on competitive rather than more sort of enjoying your hours spent. Even if you've only got a few hours to play, you can
Hmm.
make the most of that. How's that shaped what you're up to now and kind of where that's taken your own influence in terms
Hmm.
of game design?
I think part of it is as I'm getting older, I'm finding it a little bit harder to get into PvP games, because I don't have a lot of time in my day. So when I play a game, I just want to get a game where I know the experience that I'm getting, and I can get some, like I can play for an hour and or and I kind of know what I'm getting out of that hour. Whereas sometimes when I play a PvP game, sometimes I might get like a really bad match and it's frustrating. Like I used to play a lot of Battlefield, right? I love like Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5 and those games. And one of the problems I had with Battlefield was I would get a really enjoyable match maybe 40% of the time. 60% of the time, I would get these really unbalanced matches, and sometimes there would be this really bad hacker. Holy shit, Battlefield had a really bad hacking problem. But if it wasn't for the hacking, they also had a problem with balance. Like a lot, the
Yeah.
problem with Battlefield is you had like 50 versus 50, and sometimes the maps, like the teams would just be so unbalanced. Like you'd have this one team that was just completely wasting it, and so it was like it wasn't really a fun experience. It was just difficult to find a really fun like really balanced maps like matches. So I kind of got like as I'm getting older, I just enjoy kind of like single player experiences more. I like PvE games. Like I had a lot of fun with Left 4 Dead, so that was a big influence for me. Like I just really enjoyed that mechanic and just the way that felt. And so I wanted to make a game kind of like Left 4 Dead or Payday, where I can just And one of the differences when you're making a PvE game, you can sort of you don't really need to playtest it with so many people because like PvP games require a lot of balance, a lot of
Yeah,
polish,
yeah.
a lot of pivoting. But with a PvE game, you're playing like you can sort of you can design it like with a small playtest. Like you can get like feedback and you can sort of understand how fun it is just by playing it by yourself. And so that makes it a little bit easier. So yeah, that's the reason why I kind of pivoted, and it's definitely a different mentality when I develop games for PvE because um, like a lot of things like we can I don't have to worry about like cheating, for example. That's really I think honestly I think the cheating aspect of it makes it like I think that's one of the reasons why I kind of stay away from PvP
Okay.
because it's such a detriment, you know, because it's just one of those things that to combat hacking it requires a lot of resources. You know, you gotta pay for like these third party hacking solutions, and that's just one thing I just didn't want to get involved with. But yeah, PvE for me, the reason I'm enjoying it right now, it's just it allows me to kind of like experiment with different level design. Like designing levels with PvE is much less restrictive, I would say, because PvP levels tend to be very balanced, and you have to worry
Yeah, yeah.
about like and it's very restrictive, because when you're making a level that's balanced, it tends to look a little bit boring. But with PvE, I can create environments that are a little bit more challenging and more exciting because I'm not kind of tied down to these certain restrictions. Like it has to be like asymmetrical, or it has to be symmetrical. It has to have certain number of lanes, that kind of thing. So there's a bit more freedom in design. So I would say it's much more enjoyable to create environments for a PVE environment for sure. Yeah.
It's opened up sort of to take the lid off in terms of just see what feels fun and kind of push the idea out rather than obviously literally the direct contrast what you were saying at the time where you
Mm-hmm.
were told, look, we need to stick to this kind of lighting, this kind of design.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
suppose now you don't really have any rails, so if you one day you wake up and you're like, oh, I've had a brilliant idea,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want
For
to
sure.
try this, you can
Yeah.
actually put it into practice and see
For
if it
sure.
works.
Yeah, there's less restriction. Yeah, I mean, like when I was making tactical intervention, I
Mm.
was kind of throwing the kitchen sink. I was doing a lot of experimentation, and
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I was much more freeform with a lot of the game consoles for that. And I think one of the challenges we had with that was I was trying too much, and then I couldn't polish all of it because we kind of threw the kitchen sink at it, and like there were some bits of it that were fun, and some bits of it that we probably should have ignored, but we just didn't have the resources to kind of polish all of it and just make it a cohesive product. Because honestly, there was certain things I was really proud of with tactical intervention. I think the driving missions. I think if we spent a bit more time fleshing that out, I think that could have been a fun part of the game. And I think we
Yeah.
probably kind of we dropped the ball on that. It was just one of those projects that it was just a bit too over our heads. We bit off more than we can
Mm.
chew.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. I think as well. Like for people that probably weren't around at the time, especially, it was quite expansive for what it offered. It did a
Mhm.
lot in one game. So I think I can
Yeah.
imagine, like in terms
Yeah.
of development, you were
Yeah.
probably fingers in all the pies every day. Like we've got to
Yeah.
work on this. We need to finish this, whilst
Yeah.
also trying to flesh out the idea. And yeah,
Yeah, for
it felt
sure.
like something that had a lot of love put into it, but it was very big. It was quite
Yeah.
a wide scope of ideas.
Exactly. And that was my failure. I didn't have a very uh like focused idea of what the game could have been, what the game
Mm.
should have been. It was just sort of it was a kind of a kitchen sink approach. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I should have. And I think that was because I didn't. We developed in such a closed environment. We
Yeah.
didn't have people telling me, hey, this game's. I'm not sure what you're trying to make with this game. We didn't have people telling us this, and so we didn't. We lost that perspective, and that really affected us. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think how that does shape a lot of things differently because obviously it is just the one-to-one nature of like if you ask 100 people even you'll get such varied responses from each of
Yeah.
them and can kind of
Yeah.
dilute that down into what's most important, or at least
Yeah.
as well if it's a bigger team, kind of like,
Yeah.
look, we've got 16 people that have this art feedback.
Mhm.
Is any of this relevant? We've got 10
Yeah.
people that have commented on this mechanic and kind of
Yeah.
give you a bigger scope. Because I think, like you say, even with some of the other releases that we've seen come and go, maybe some of it's a bit unfair as well because you get people that maybe don't give these games a full go. They just kind of knee jerk in the sense that a lot of people these days as well. It
Mhm.
feels like you get your information from maybe you've watched X video or you've watched X stream, and
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
your take on the
Yeah.
game, right? Whereas I
Yeah.
think, especially sort of with a lot of this stuff, if you try it yourself, there might be some things you really enjoy,
Yeah.
just because it's in the open doesn't
Yeah.
mean it has to stay like that forever. We've seen a lot of games that have been released and then been iterated on and
Yeah.
become
Like
far better than they
No Man's
are.
Sky is a good example. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Right.
Yeah. No, I think yeah. I think you bring up a good point. I think a lot of times like a lot of the criticism against like certain games like High Guard and Concord, a lot of it is kind of like uh kind of like this mentality of like oh shit, somebody's kind of like jumping on this game and like and they're kind of getting negative feedback. It kind of gets amplified because a lot of people we do have this kind of like this weird sense of like tribal
Yeah, yeah,
mentality
yeah.
where if someone is mocking something else, it's we kind of jump in and say, oh
It's
shit,
hip, it's cool.
look
Yeah,
at this
the
game.
sort of hive mind
Yeah.
approach to it. Yeah, yeah. No,
I
it's
kind
true.
of I kind of fall into that trap myself too, because sometimes, like for example, a movie, like if a movie comes out and a lot of people are like, holy shit, this movie's so good, you gotta
Yeah.
check this out. Then I get this preconceived notion where, oh, is this movie that good? And when I watch the movie, I have this high expectation. This movie, everyone else says is good, so I'm kind of thinking, what's so good about this movie? So I don't like to go into a movie with this preconceived notion of like, it's very popular. A lot of people like this movie, then I should like this movie. Yeah, I think it's something that it's easy to fall into though. I mean, when we have this social media having such a large effect on our
Yeah.
habits.
It's so big now, especially like when you think about sort of the way we operate as people,
Yeah.
it's far too expansive, right? Like obviously,
Yeah.
even us becoming friends and meeting each other goes to show the nature of how far the world has become connected. Like we probably would have
Hmm.
never have crossed paths, but because of the overlap,
Hmm.
we've been able to sort of meet each other and get on, and it's interesting how obviously that's taken to the masses in terms of you put something out there that maybe is
Yeah.
just something you've worked on, but now
Yeah.
millions of people see it and want
Yeah.
you to know what they think about it. And it must be a bit sort of jarring to some of these people, especially. I suppose it's why it can be a bit scary. Like if you
Hmm.
work on a product behind closed doors for so long, and then day one you put it out there, maybe you've been rushed to even ship it as well. I think we don't see a lot of that sort of true story. I remember one
Yeah.
of the classic ones, sort of a game development story that really always resonated was like the Obsidian team working on Fallout New Vegas, where they were
Oh.
told like, look, this is the deadline. It's got to come out on this day. I think they had like 11 months or whatever it was to finish
Oh.
Vegas,
Okay.
shipped the game. They were
Oh.
basically told unless it hits a 90 Metacritic score, none of you get your bonuses. And that was the
Wow.
contracted agreement. It came in at, I think, 89. So they were like one
Wow.
point short. And it was never honoured. They were never given the bonuses because that was the contracted agreement, right? But then
Damn.
obviously now you look back at Fallout New Vegas, it's a cult classic. It's become
Yeah.
like an RPG staple of the time. But
Wow.
they had to ship it, even though the game wasn't finished. That was the deadline. So
Yeah.
it's stuff like that where I think there's so much more that goes on that obviously not everyone really has this perspective to the kind of the human side of game development. I
Mm.
think gets forgotten a lot because like you know from yourself, I imagine it was many a sleepless night kind of just
Mm.
sitting there sort of stressing to get things ready for builds, get things ready to ship, making sure that build even works as well
Wow.
on multiple different PCs or multiple different
Yeah.
setups. Like it
Yeah.
must be intense.
It is. It is. Yeah. I mean, you bring up a good point. Being a game developer in this day and age is it's definitely it's exponentially more difficult than it was in 2000. Like it's just the sheer amount of like competition that we have. Like like on Steam, like every day there's like
Yeah.
400 new games, and because of that, it just made it much more difficult for games to just get attention. Is CS 1.6 is it officially still available on Steam? You can still
I
download it.
think so. Yeah, it's still
Oh,
part
okay,
of.
yeah.
Yeah, it's still
It's
there.
just
Yeah, yeah.
CS:GO is not like CS:GO and CS Source. Those are you can't really download
So
those
we
on Steam.
you can yeah. So 1.6, yeah, obviously whatever version was the last version. I think the technically shipped. I can't remember what the final number was with the last patch, but
Yeah.
I think that's just Counter Strike. That just exists. Condition
Yes.
Zero still exists.
Okay.
Source is still there because everyone plays Gary's mod, and obviously you need all the deposits from
Oh.
Source. So Source still
Yeah, yeah.
exists, and then
But CS:GO is not.
CS:GO got removed.
Mm.
My theory with this was always the fact that obviously when we went from 1.6 into Source, we fragmented the player base massively, right? Because not
Yeah.
everyone wanted to move.
Yes. Yes.
I
Yes.
always thought the reasoning was if they just replaced CS:GO because
Yeah,
CS2 obviously kind of is CS:GO 2.
yeah.
It feels like
They
it's the same game but different,
yeah,
right? I
yeah,
thought that was the idea. Was they just wanted to avoid the
yeah.
possibility of
The fracturing.
fragmenting the player base, just
Yep.
force everyone to play it and
Hmm.
kind
Yeah.
of make a hard swap.
No, I agree with you. I think that was probably one of the big reasons why they did that. And also the fact that CS2 and CS:GO, like the system specs that you needed to run them, they're pretty similar. Like if you can play
Yeah, yeah.
CS:GO, like CS2 is not a huge you don't really need a huge upgrade to do that. So they didn't really lose players by forcing them to go to CS2. So they could do that. But yeah, that does make a lot of sense. Yeah. Because I was there when they introduced CS Source, and like you had like half of the players on CS Source and half of them on
Yeah,
CS
yeah.
1.6. It was really weird. Like I imagine the tournament organizers, like, they didn't know which one to support. I think most of them just stuck with 1.6 because it
They
just
did
felt better.
for years. Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember it was like even going to LAN events sort of with CSS's release, you had the 1.6 tournament and the Source tournament, and the Source tournament would have like a quarter of the teams. It would be tiny in comparison, and then
Yeah.
it
Source
was
was kind
so
of like a forgotten
bizarre.
thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think because well, it had a lot of good ideas and like the physics stuff and kind of the way they changed stuff a little bit, but obviously it was different. It was very different in kind of the way it felt. A lot of
Yeah.
people didn't like it because it was such a disconnect. And
Hmm.
then I remember it was the Orange Box update. It was like an engine change. Something happened within CSS, and it moved over to a different branch of the source engine. It wasn't the one it was released on. It was like the Orange Box.
Oh,
It was
okay.
the Half-Life episodes
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
version of the
Yeah.
source engine. So
Okay.
spraying felt different, moving
Oh.
felt different. Suddenly things felt different. So even the source players then got fragmented from being
Oh
either
shit.
they liked the release version of Source
Oh
or
damn.
the Orange Box version, and that was it. It caused a whole drama. So it was like
Oh
you were
wow.
2 layers deep of like fragment in the player base.
I didn't realize that. Yeah, because honestly, when I was at Valve, we would play CS Source, and so honestly, to be honest, when we played it, we couldn't tell the difference. Like a lot of the
Yeah,
people
yeah,
at
yeah.
Valve, they honestly couldn't feel the difference. They thought this feels very exactly the same. It just looks different. So we were kind of surprised when the community were kind of like, this feels different. We didn't really. I mean, me personally, I didn't know what they were. I couldn't really understand what they were saying. So, but I guess we didn't play it like to the level that they were playing it. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I think that's what it is. It's one of those where it very much is like the min max of
Hmm.
thousands of hours every month, like
Yeah.
committing to that, where you notice these things. Because it
You
was like
notice
even
these
for
slight.
me,
Yeah.
I kind of got into Counter Strike properly and sort of
Hmm.
played the most in Source. Like it was
Hmm.
tail end of kind of Gold Source, like the end of sort of 1.6. So I had played bits, but obviously sort of growing up with it, especially it was Source first, then into CS:GO, and I played an
Mm.
awful lot of Source. So you kind of did notice. I think in my perspective, I liked the game a lot. I thought it was good.
Hmm.
I thought it actually, again, had
Hmm.
a lot of good sort of changes for the better, and sort of the way sort of they tied in a lot of the newer engine stuff. You kind of,
Hmm.
it basically just felt, like you'd taken the Counter Strike idea but wrapped it in Half-Life 2's kind
Yeah.
of feel, and
Hmm.
that wasn't especially bad. It was,
Hmm.
especially I think once you got used to it, it felt good. But a lot of people, I think, just found it jarring because of how
Yeah.
long they'd invested into
Yeah.
into
1.6. Yeah.
1.6 at the time. It was suddenly just such a big disconnect.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. But yeah, this is an interesting time period for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It is a weird one. I think before we start to wrap up then and sort
Hmm.
of close things down, I think we've had a good sort of overall look at a lot of different subjects. I wanted to ask in terms of if I get you to sort of cast your mind back.
Hmm.
So you're in the office,
Hmm.
you've got maybe a coffee, maybe a tea. I'm not sure what your preference of beverage would be at the time,
Yeah.
but kind of the sights, the smells, any
Mm.
positive memories, things that you remember that really sort of as a good story, a thing to look back on, kind of any of those that spring to mind through that time of Valve that you'd like to sort of put out in the open.
Well, honestly, I had a lot of great memories at Valve. Just I got along with everyone there. I would say 99% of the people at Valve, we really got. I mean, there was probably a few people that like kind of like I couldn't really get get to on the same levels with. But I would say 99% of them I loved them, and for for the most part, I still keep in touch with some of them, and I would say probably only 10% of them are still there because a lot of them have kind of moved on. But honestly, I mean, I remember we had a lot of extracurricular activities. Like we had like a soccer team. Sorry, football. We call it soccer. So I remember a lot of the Valve employees. We would get we took part in the soccer league basically. So we had our own team, and it was just so much fun, just kind of connecting with these employees on an extracurricular level, and just getting to know them and getting to play with them. And yeah, in terms of memories at Valve, there was this one time when I first worked at Valve. It was a really open environment. They had this office, and it was so open. They didn't have any locks on the front door. It was weird.
Okay.
It was super open. And I remember this one time, a bunch of these fanatics, these fans, they basically just kind of came into the office, and they pretended to be a friend of an employee, and they just, oh yeah, I know this guy. I know like this guy that works here. And so they would just kind of peruse around they were just
wandered in, just walked around.
Just wandered into the office. They were just like checking out people's computers and just like looking at what's like what people were working on, kind of thing. And this was after everyone left. Like this was at 7 p.m. So the office was quite quiet. Yeah. And so there was probably only like 3 or 4 people there. And so I was there, I think, and I and like with people, nobody knew who these people were, but they said that they were friends of someone else, so we just kind of believed them. We just, okay, yeah, fine, because back then we had such an open office environment. And then I remember the next day, an email kind of went out and says, does anybody know that those two people? Does anybody know those 2 people? And so nobody responded. Said, no, I don't know these people. And so it turns out that these 2 people were just some random fanboys that just kind of walked into the office. And they just started checking out the computer. Like, who knows what they could have done? They could have stolen memorabilia. And like ever since then, like at that point, like everyone, like the higher ups at Valve, they said, okay, no more open door policy. We got, like they decided to put locks on the doors. Like every door had locks, and we had like these key card ideas. It started like it started to become like a proper office. And so I remember that turning point. Everything like just became like much more structured and much more like a proper company. Because prior to then, Valve seemed like it was such a laid back environment. Like everyone was so chill. It's like, oh, this is Valve. This is an open office. Nobody's gonna come here. It's like people were just walking in and out. Nobody knew who. Like yeah. And so it was that turning point that they decided to just to be cognizant of. Hey, we have a lot of crazy fanboys. We should probably be a bit more be more secure about our security settings. Yeah. So
I suppose that was kind of you reached a point where it was like, okay, we're big enough now that we have to take this seriously. Like we kind of have to be aware that some people might just try.
That was basically the turning point where we realized, okay, Valve is actually we're actually pretty popular. People actually like us, and they actually want to like spy on us basically. So and it was basically that turning point where we decided, okay, we have to take our reputation a bit seriously and start to treat ourselves like our office as something a little bit more professional and not just like a casual work environment. But yeah, that was an interesting thing that happened. Like someone just walked into our offices and just kind of
that is bizarre. That is crazy to think about. That you obviously you could just walk in, like the door was just there if you.
Yeah, that was like this was like 2004, 2003. So it was really early. So this is like an early time back when Valve, like this is even before Steam like was even a thing, right? So Valve was like not popular and like well, I wouldn't say they weren't popular. I mean, at that point they already released Half-Life 2, I think it was. But we were just kind of like we were just on our apex of being like this worldwide global phenomenon of a company, and
things were still ramping. It was still kind of on its up.
And even prior to that, we actually did have other random people just coming to the office. And like oftentimes I didn't really like I didn't know who was everybody. I didn't recognize everybody, so I just thought he was just an employee. So I just remember seeing a lot of random people, and I was like, does he work here? I mean, I just assume everyone worked here, so I just I guess he works here. He's in the kitchen. He's eating our food, so I assume he's a worker. So
he must work here.
Because
that's hilarious.
I was still quite young. I was only 21 at the time, so. I was very quiet. I wasn't very imposing. I didn't really I just assumed everybody. I just assumed
Yeah, yeah.
everybody that was there belonged there. I never questioned anybody. So it was just a case of, I'm pretty sure we had a lot of weirdos that came into our office that, that probably shouldn't have been there. Yeah. But yeah, that
Oh
was a funny
man.
moment. That was a really funny moment. Trying to think of something else. No,
That
there's
is
a lot of weird things.
hilarious.
Yeah. I mean, Gabe. I
Yeah.
don't know if you know Gabe. Gabe Newell, obviously. He was a
Yeah, yeah,
super.
yeah.
He was really eccentric. I remember one time he got into this thing called Mongolian throat singing. Uh,
Okay, yes.
do
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know about
yeah.
this?
I'm
Like,
aware. I'm aware.
yeah. So he was really big into that, right? So he would like do this thing, and so he would walk down the offices, practicing his throat singing, and it got really annoying. And then like because prior to this, we had an open door policy. Everybody had their doors were open, and so if you wanted to talk to a coworker, you can just go and say, "Hey, what's can you tell me about this? I have this problem here." But ever since he started getting into throat singing, everybody's doors were like closed. It's just became this really like it became like a prison. It
Uh,
was like boom, doors are all closed.
uh,
Nobody's open for nothing. Right, and so I was like, it was hard, and so if I wanted to talk to someone, I had to like go up there, knock on their door. It just
that's
became
so funny.
it became really formal, and so yeah,
It's hilarious because it's one of these things that like it feels like it would be it kind of so far removed and taken out of context, but it's like obviously I remember discovering firstly what Mongolian throat singing was, and I was like,
hmm
okay, interesting, right?
yeah,
And then I
yeah,
remember I saw this was like some bit of media, I can't remember, it was someone talking about this a long time ago, where they basically
hmm
said kind of similar things. They were like, yeah, when I was at the office, he randomly got into it, and
yeah,
this started happening. But it's so funny hearing like firsthand that yeah, it just got to the point where everyone was like, well,
yeah,
it's going to go on, so let's
yeah.
just shut the doors.
No, no, yeah. It went on. I think he did it for about I don't know 6 or 7 months or something. It was a lengthy period. It wasn't just like a week. It wasn't just like one of these like a week a
Yeah,
fad. Like
yeah.
let's just do it. No, he was serious. He
He was
got
into
really into.
it. He was
He got
invested.
yeah. He was invested. He tends to be like that. When he gets in like when he gets into a certain interest, he can really throw himself into it. And so
Damn.
he got into this for 7 months and nobody really had the balls to say, "Hey, Gabe, come on, this sounds terrible." Nobody had the balls to tell him, please don't do this in the office. It's like we just said, "Hey, you're the CEO, just do what you got to do, buddy." But we just acted
Oh, that's
accordingly.
so
We just
good.
basically we closed our doors. Everybody was wearing headphones. It became a very closed environment. It wasn't as open as it used to be, but thankfully, it only lasted like 7 months, and then after that, people opened the doors again. It was much easier
Oh,
to
mate.
connect with our colleagues. But that was a funny kind of like period of time, where he got into that. But Gabe was a great guy though. He was a really just really passionate about interests. He had multiple interests, and whenever he got into them, he was really passionate about it. He was a really friendly guy, easy to talk to for me. I mean, for me, I can just talk to him. But he's very eccentric, super eccentric person. But
Damn.
yeah,
That's so
but
funny though. It's yeah. It sounds like it would have been kind of adapting to sort of that changing landscape of like it did always look like from the way things were developed and the way sort of people have spoken about their time there and how it worked, that it
yeah,
was very free flowing. It was very much if you're interested in something, if you're passionate about this, do it. If there's something that you think you can
yeah,
add to this project, do it. If there's
yeah,
and
yeah,
it seems like that stems from the top down, where it was always just sort of like, yeah, like, look, the things
yeah,
you love are going to be where
yeah,
you make your best work. So just
yeah.
do that.
Yeah, I remember Gabe's mentality is he wanted us to feel as comfortable as we can because he felt like that's when we operated the best, and so he wanted to create an environment that way we can just be super casual. Every like there was no dress code, people coming to work, and the hours they were very flexible. You can come into work anytime you wanted. And I remember at one point people started bringing animals in, like because
Oh,
they,
okay.
they
Yeah,
they
yeah,
had
yeah.
cats, right? So people would bring in some dogs, and I think one time someone brought in this bird or something. It was like a parrot, a parakeet or something. But it was so annoying. It was super noisy, and then like a lot of the people they were like the nearby coworkers were saying, "Hey, listen, this is a bit much. Please, like this might be taking it to another level. Please,
Yeah, yeah.
please don't bring your bird, right? Because your bird is too noisy." So, but for the most part, they try to make it really accommodating for us, and it was a very great environment, like super just super chill, and yeah, I remember I remember fondly about like I was because I was surrounded by like some of the best developers in the industry. So
Yeah, yeah.
I was able to learn from some of like the best programmers, and some of the greatest artists, and because of that, it allowed me to kind of really mature as a developer. And so that was a it's a great learning experience for me, really, to just be a part of that and just surrounded by such incredible developers. And yeah, Valve were great. They're great. Yeah. Do you know about their yearly, like every year Valve they would take the entire company to Hawaii. I don't
Yes,
know if you know.
the
Yeah.
annual Hawaii
Yep,
trip. So
the
yeah,
annual
yeah,
Hawaii
yeah,
trip.
yeah.
Yes, and I was a
Okay.
part of that one time. They took me out there one couple times, and it was so awesome. He basically rented out the Hilton. Basically, the entire hotel was just nothing but Valve employees. So he basically
Okay, yeah,
rented
yeah,
out
yeah.
this hotel for all the employees and all their families. It was such an incredible event, and like everybody, we just bonded from this,
Yeah.
and yeah, we spent like 6 or 7 days there, and like it was so great. Like spending time with all the employees, getting to know their families, and just yeah, I just it was great. And so ever since then, it was so successful that they ended up doing this every year. So every year they would do these Hawaii trips, and it was just something for the company to like look forward to. It was just cool being part of it. I kind of I kind of that was the one thing I miss about it, about being part of like the culture.
Yeah,
Just they
yeah.
were so very family oriented and just really yeah, tight knit I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Hmm.
think that's something that, like, from everything sort of I've ingested over the years, and from
Hmm.
people I've sort of spoken to, it's always kind
Hmm.
of been the key sentiment is
Yeah,
that where obviously a lot of companies say like, oh, we're a family, but obviously
yeah,
that doesn't really mean anything. It feels like
no,
that was always the case. That was the ideology.
yeah,
Like they just
yeah,
everyone
yeah,
was very much sort of
yeah,
they were friends with each other, they
yeah,
knew each
yeah,
other, and you wanted to spend time with one another. You
yeah,
wanted everyone to do their best.
yeah,
There wasn't kind of a nature of like anyone's
yeah,
trying to slight each other for a paycheck. It was always just everyone wanted the best for the title or the
yeah.
company or
Yeah,
just
for the most
themselves.
part,
Admittedly,
it was very much like that. There was no like infighting. There was no. It was not very cutthroat. There was not too much politics going on. It
yeah,
was just a very relaxed environment, and but I think when we say this, it's important to realize that Valve at the time they were such a successful company, they can afford to do this. They can afford to create this environment, and so it's not something that I can sort of say. I wish all companies can do what Valve does,
yeah,
because
yeah,
honestly, not everyone has like that money pit that they have with Steam. Like for like as you're aware, like they make so much money from Steam that they don't have to make games like for the next like 100 years.
yeah,
They'll
yeah,
still
yeah.
be able to keep their like their employees paid, and that's the success of Steam. Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember.
Well, it's
Yeah, when
I think
Steam
it's I was in,
first. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say I think it's interesting as well because even like you were saying earlier, it's one of those where basically there was that period where, God, what was this sort of midway through the 2000s where it was almost like, are they still a games company? It
Yeah.
felt like, it stopped for a bit. It was a little bit more hardware focused, and then
Yes.
we heard
Yes.
no
Yeah.
rumblings about anything
Yeah.
new for a while,
Yes.
So
Yes. And for the most
it
part,
kind
they
of
didn't
goes
make
to show,
games.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll tell you a story about Steam. I don't know if this is public knowledge or if anyone is aware of this. When Steam was first introduced as an idea, as a concept, this is around 2003, I think 2004. Um, the whole idea of a digital marketplace was novel. Nobody heard of it. Nothing like at the time, everybody was just buying games from EB Games, all these physical
Yeah,
stores.
yeah.
And so when Gabe was the one that pushed Steam, when he was the one that was pushing Steam so hard, I remember the sentiment in the company was like, yeah, this is not gonna work. This is just like this is kind of one of those pie in the sky ideas that Gabe has. We'll just let him. We'll just he's the CEO. We'll just let him do what he does.
Okay.
We'll just let him do it. And then like I think a lot of the company they had very low expectations for Steam succeeding. They just thought it was just gonna be just a small thing. Just it was never gonna put a dent in the traditional publishers. Because back then the traditional publishers like EA, Activision, all these huge publishers, they were the ones controlling the game industry. They were the ones that were driving all the market, the prices and all that. So for we a lot of the people at Valve, we felt like a lot of myself, like, and a lot of my coworkers, we just felt like Steam is gonna be something that's kind of a niche thing, because back then the internet speeds were really slow. So we didn't
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
think. We were kind of like, man, how is someone gonna download like 20 CDs worth of data over the internet? That's gonna take them forever. So we thought, wow, Steam, it's gonna be it's gonna be a bit of a fad. So we didn't see the long game. So we were kind of like we had very low expectations for Steam's success. And so I remember when Steam was first released, it didn't go so well because it was very rough, obviously, as with all new releases. And so And so we were kind of going through the first few years of Steam was pretty I would say like troubling, and it's very very problematic. Had a lot of bugs, had a lot of issues with it, and so I remember a lot of my colleagues were like, "Man, I wonder how much longer Gabe is gonna keep this going." I was thinking in the back of my mind, eventually we're gonna shut down Steam because it wasn't really blowing up. We didn't have a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah.
momentum on it. So it's just amazing how how Valve were able to kind of stick to the long term picture and sort of just kind of play the long game and just iteratively just keep improving on Steam. And I mean, there was that turning point where Steam, we started to get other developers and publishers signing with Steam, and that's when it just started to take off. And I don't remember when that happened, but I mean, it was definitely there was definitely a few years when in the early process of Steam where like the sentiment was not good. It was just kind of like, we're kind of bleeding money here. We're not sure like how much longer it's gonna last. But it just goes to show how much forethought that Gabe had when he came up with that idea that this is the future. Digital marketplace is the future. Internet speeds will get better, because we didn't know
Yeah.
that. In
No, of
2003,
course, yeah.
we had no idea like fiber would be a thing. We had no idea, like we didn't know, like it's like, because back then our internet speeds were like, I was getting like maybe like 230, like maybe 300 milliseconds to
Yeah, yeah,
whenever
yeah.
I played Counter Strike. If I got like 200 milliseconds, I thought that was a good session. I was like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I got 200, baby, let's do this.
No, exactly, man.
I was like,
That's what I mean.
so I
Like,
had,
we were all on dial-up. Like, I remember
yeah,
when
yeah,
the phone used to ring,
dude,
and my
yeah,
mum would
I
pick
would
up
I
the
would
phone.
scream. I'd be like, fucking put
Yeah,
that down.
that's what I
I
mean.
would like,
And it was
I
just
would
like,
be
I'm
like,
in a
yeah,
game of CS.
yeah, exactly.
Like, answer the
Yeah.
phone, internet goes off, and you're
Yeah,
just like,
exactly.
come on, man.
Yeah,
Like,
I know. I remember those days, dude. Those are amazing.
yeah.
My dad would be so mad at me because he would recognize that damn sound, like
Yeah,
he
just
was,
the
yeah,
screech.
yeah, exactly, the
Every
screech. Yeah, I
time.
know.
It's like,
And
what are
he
you
knew
doing? I'm
I
trying
was
to
playing
play
games. Yeah, so
Oh,
that
man.
those were difficult times where I would have to like tell my dad, please, I'm playing games. Don't pick up the phone. Don't make a
Yeah,
call. That kind of shit. So that was funny. But
yeah.
but so
It's
none of us
crazy,
had
man.
yeah. So none of us you know had a positive outlook on how the internet, or how long it would take the internet to get to where we are today. Like, we never imagined it would be this fast in 20 years, right? So it's kind of amazing how, if there's a technology behind it, with enough if there's enough people pushing it, things can happen really fast. And so so the story of Steam was, it came out as a process that a lot of people internally didn't think it would really take off.
Yeah,
We had a very low expectations of it, to be honest, and to have it become the juggernaut that it is today, it's definitely something that I look back upon and say, wow, boy, were we wrong about our initial fears. It's good that
yeah.
Gabe was in charge, and he was the one that was like pushing it, and it was not us that was making the decision to like, because if I was in charge, I would say, whoa, let's put the brakes on this. Let's cut it,
Yeah, yeah.
cut our losses here. But
Exactly. I suppose it's one of those where, like, the look back of seeing the success now and how much it kind of shaped everything for the better. It's probably quite, vindicated to be wrong at the time. Like, you feel like, damn, you're happy to be proven
Yeah,
that one was,
for sure. Yeah.
it was the long-term call to
Yeah.
make.
And another thing I'll tell you about Steam, funny things. I don't think a lot of people know this, but you know how Steam. Okay, so back in the day when we were coming up with the idea of Steam, we didn't have we didn't decide on how we should deliver the content to the players, because downloading all of these big files to all of these millions of players, we wanted to cut the cost. We wanted to like minimize the cost. So initially, Steam was actually planned to be like a peer-to-peer service, like
Okay, yeah.
like BitTorrent. You know BitTorrent? You know
Yeah,
how
yeah.
BitTorrent works? So you have like people sharing their files across. So basically, it was like a community content delivery driven system. And so Steam was initially planned to be a peer-to-peer service, because they wanted to basically kind of get away from the cost of having servers, hosting all of this data, and having the cost of CDNs, content delivery networks. It was very expensive back then, like super expensive. And so Steam, we initially planned on they initially planned on making a version that was going to be kind of like BitTorrent, where like people would be sharing content across the network. And I remember they spent a good amount of time trying to make that work. I remember they hired the guy that made BitTorrent, and they tried to like implement this protocol. But in the end, what happened was the privacy concerns and like the security concerns, they were like they couldn't really overcome that, because peer-to-peer file sharing, there's huge amounts of like security and privacy issues. And so because of that, they couldn't overcome those issues. They decided to kind of ditch that and just kind of go to the traditional system of just having content delivery networks, where you had these data centers all over the world, and they would basically deliver the games to all the players. And so yeah, interesting thing is people didn't realize that at one point Steam almost became like BitTorrent. Like initially it was planned to be a peer-to-peer sharing service. And so thankfully, well, maybe thank louder, but they just couldn't get it to work. But yeah, I imagine it would have saved a lot of operating costs.
Oh yeah.
But
especially
that's just
now, it would probably be like the biggest sort of network of anything in the world if it went on in that direction with how many users you have.
Oh
like
God,
God, the connection between would be ludicrous. Like,
it would be ludicrous. But yeah, thankfully Valve kind of stuck to the traditional CDN of having hosted servers. But that's just a little side bit. I don't think many people noticed that. No, I don't think that's public knowledge. But yeah, initially Steam was they were trying to make it peer to peer. Yeah, basically like BitTorrent.
Yeah. No, that's crazy. The alternate timeline is
the alternate timeline.
It's wild, man.
Yeah, because it would have affected a lot of things. I mean, it would have cut down the costs of Steam, and who knows what happened. But that's just one little tidbit of Steam that I remember. Yeah, but yeah. Other than that, but my time at Valve was extremely positive, and it's something that I look upon in just like nothing but positive memories for sure.
That's amazing. I genuinely do really appreciate you being able to kind of give me and the viewers some insight into your time there, Minh. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and especially sort of, you get some of your thoughts back on the days, your time at Valve, and take on the industry and all the various subjects we've discussed over the past 2 hours or so. But before I let you go, of course, wanted to give you an opportunity. If there's anything you'd like to promote, I know you're very busy at the minute. You've been running around promoting your new title. You've been deep at work. Is there anything you want to sort of put out there and mention and kind of wrap this one up? Any thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, just thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, especially you, Jacky. Being a good friend of. It's been a great talk. We had a great conversation about things that I don't normally talk about, and it's been really really enjoyable. But yeah, in terms of what I've been working on, if people are interested in checking out what I've been working on, it's basically it's a 4-player co-op shooter. It's called Alpha Response, and it's very similar to Payday, where you play 4 players with your friends, and you're just fighting against enemy AI. And it's a very fast-paced game. I would say it's very similar to games like Left 4 Dead, I would say. So it's not something like Ready or Not, where it's very slower, more tactical. It's much more fast-paced. It's much more action-focused. So if you enjoy games like Payday or Ready or Left 4 Dead, feel free to give it a shot right now. It's available on Steam. Just look for Alpha Response, and you should find it. And we've been in early access. So yeah, thanks for checking it out. And thanks again, Jacky, for having me. It's always a pleasure to speak with you and to see you in person. And it's thanks again, and always a pleasure to speak with your followers. And hopefully we can do this again sometime in person. If you ever come out to Vancouver, I'd love to show you around the city, and we can do something like where it's like a live
that'd be awesome.
My hometown or something. And maybe we can go to Valve together even, that'd be fun.
Pop in. Yeah.
But
that'd be beautiful, man. It's genuinely, it's always a pleasure getting to chat and spend time with you. I'll hold you to that. We'll book something in person. We'll do a live one. We'll get a little setup. That'll be fun. We'll bring some cameras down. But yeah, dude, like genuinely, it's always a pleasure. Always happy to promote you and your work, especially because you've been nothing but lovely to me anytime I've been able to spend time with you. And genuinely, really do appreciate you coming on and kind of sharing your thoughts on a lot of different subjects. I know you're a busy man, so I will let you you go. But thanks again for everyone that's watched tonight's episode. If you enjoyed it, let us know. Of course, we'll be back for much more, and make sure you give your thanks to Minh and let him know how much of a talented individual he really is. We'll catch you all next time on another installment of the Dead Air podcast. Bye-bye for now.
Thanks again.